This is Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keene and Paul Sweeney.
We're addicted to the parlor game, the Fed, the monetary ballet.
Where do you see opportunities in a fixed income space here in 24?
With Lisa Mateo on markets.
AI affecting demand for cloud computing.
And Michael Barr with news.
Another legal setback for Donald Trump, this time across the pond.
The best in economics, finance, investment, and international relations. This is Bloomberg Surveillance on Bloomberg Radio.
Good morning, everyone. Tom Keene, Paul Sweeney, Michael Barr, and Lisa Mateo. This morning, John Tucker in for Paul Sweeney, Michael Barr, and Lisa Mateo.
Not Michael Barr.
It's the summer, folks. It's the busiest week of the summer. Microsoft this afternoon is really front and center for me. I think that's a hugely important report for the street. Thank you, Julian Emmanuel, Evercore ISI, for the best on earnings summaries there as well. Paul Sweeney out with a plague. I think he had to go to the Vespa dealer. But John Tucker in for Paul Sweeney, and also, Lisa Mateo needs some help as well. You're busy this morning. It's a busy time. It's a busy week in the summer.
But it makes it all go so much quicker, this earnings season, when you're doing three jobs. So no problem.
Well,
and being with you, of course.
And let's have a shout out here. Kriti Gupta over in London just nailed the earnings season there with Procter & Gamble coming out 170 down to a 165. And I'll look at the organic revenue there. I think that's what Gina Martin Adams is most focused on. Not what earnings are doing, margin, guidance, but just what's the top line look like? Sector to sector. Eyes on Venezuela as well. David Gura scheduled to be with us. Lots going on in the political landscape as well this morning. Again, Microsoft, the huge issue. You look for that this afternoon on Bloomberg Radio and YouTube worldwide as we go through the day. We're out on YouTube. Subscribe to Bloomberg Podcast. John Tucker has us in the Hummer. It's a new EV Hummer, which is very cool. He has it there with Apple Auto, CarPlay, I should say, Apple CarPlay, and Android Auto as well. From the Interactive Broker Studios with our Bloomberg Business Flash, John Tucker.
All right, for the moment, Tom, futures looking up. The Dow futures right now 18 points higher. S&P E-mini futures up 11, up 0.2%. And the Nasdaq futures 48 points higher. That's a rise of 0.3%. As for Treasuries, the more policy reactive 2-year yield down 1 basis point, 438. Among the data today, we're going to get the JOLTS job openings and labor turnover survey. And, of course, the start of the 2-day Fed meeting. Today, we get results tomorrow, Wednesday. Probably the policymakers, according to Economist survey by Bloomberg, will be signaling a rate cut come the September meeting. As Kriti mentioned, P&G, consumer staples, reporting quarterly sales missing analyst projections. The parade of company earnings continuing. Rahway, New Jersey-based Merck beating Wall Street profit estimates. Expect Pfizer shares may be getting a lift. They're raising their earnings forecast for the year. A Long Island City-based JetBlue Airlines cutting $3 billion in capital spending through 2029. The airline increasing to 15 the number of cities where it's ending service. They have cut more than 50 routes. And as you mentioned, Tom, Magnificent 7 continues with earnings after the close of regular trading today with the results from Microsoft. And, of course, we check the markets for you all day long right here on Bloomberg Radio. I'm John Tucker, and that is your Bloomberg Business Flash Time.
John Tucker, thanks so much. To get us started, the Fed decides tomorrow. We'll do that tomorrow afternoon. Myself, John Farrow, Lisa Abramowitz, and it'll be interesting. I'm not so much in the camp of a certitude of a September rate cut. Let's get wisdom on that with Nationwide, with a wonderful Ohio perspective. Kathleen Bostjancic joins us now, chief economist Nationwide, because she's on our side. Kathy, I look at where we are right now, and more than anything, I would say there's a certitude about a September rate cut. Why do we feel that way?
Good morning, Tom. Well, the inflation data have, namely, really cooled off significantly. It makes it seem as if that the flare-up we saw in the first quarter was anomalous, and that really inflation is back on a good trend, and eventually get back to a 2% pace. And we've also seen some slowing or moderation in employment and other key economic readings that, as the Fed Reserve says, they're more balanced, right, between the risk with inflation and employment. So kind of gives them the green light and the reason to start to cut rates.
Where are you on jobless claims when you say that the labor market is breaking? I got a 4-week moving average of the weekly data of 235,000. It's buttressed right up against a peak of 2023 of about 250,000. What's a statistic in your head where jobless claims signals let's go?
Yeah, so that, we've seen some upward movement in jobless claims, but still quite low. And I'm not suggesting or worried that we're about to see a big rollover in the labor market. It's not as if we're going to start seeing negative payroll prints or the unemployment rate jumping sharply higher. But as we creep higher, that signals some slowing. And one statistic that I would say on payrolls, besides all the other ones that we'll watch, is in the household survey, those who've been unemployed 26 weeks or longer.
Interesting.
You're starting to see that pick up.
Do you know that used to be the first statistic I looked at back when we were 8, 9, 10% unemployment? If that's the case, Kathy, let me frame this out as a dual mandate. The laureate Krugman over at the New York Times has a tweet out yesterday on this disinflation, and he says, now is what he wants Jerome Powell to do. I've got a market economist, plural, maybe led by over at Stifel, the Lindsay Piegza, saying, okay, maybe, but we need jobs to finally collapse. I don't see jobs collapsing, and I believe you just said ebbing is more like what the labor economy will do. Yeah,
that's right. I have sympathy for those who say the Fed should consider cutting rates, tomorrow, right? Getting the announcement, but they're not going to. They haven't signaled that, and I do think they want to see more data, particularly to be really convinced that the Q1 inflation data shows their confidence. But yeah, back to the labor market, moderation. Now, what we don't know is this moderation a harbinger of something more dramatic as we go into 2025? We just don't know yet. Has the Fed been too late to cut rates, starting to cut rates? Again, we don't know. But right now, I would say in the near term, there's no signs the labor market's collapsing.
Hey, Kathy, give me an idea. Just how restrictive are we at this point?
Well, we're restricted when you look at certain pockets of the economy, right? So housing, we know, has been paralyzed for months, right? For well over a year. People are locked into low mortgages, aren't even putting their homes up for sale or moving. Housing starts are still really low. And then we know that the lower income households are really facing headwinds. They're increasingly maxed out on the credit card. The New York Fed data shows us, the Philly Fed data shows us that they're delinquent. And even though inflation has cooled, as we all know, price levels are still high relative to pre-pandemic. So they're feeling the pressure there. I think that, and the pandemic savings are tapped out. So we have to remember that the tailwinds that got us this resilient economy are really fading, and the headwinds are still there and maybe even getting a little stronger.
On that other part of the dual mandate with employment, when employment goes, what does it take with it? Consumer spending, obviously, right?
Yeah, that's right. As employment slows, aggregate income declines, and then that starts to restrain consumer spending. And the consumers don't have that, they don't have a lot of savings to rely on if income starts to slow. You've got an unemployment, a savings rate that's 3.4, mark that against pre-pandemic savings rate, which was 7.7. And we also know, again, that you're starting to see delinquencies when the unemployment rate's only 4.1, delinquencies on credit card and loan payments. What will that look like if we do start to see some deeper cracks in the labor market?
Kathy, thank you so much. Kathleen Bostjancic with Nationwide to get us started towards a Fed day. Tomorrow, the Fed decides. We'll do that in the afternoon, 1:30-ish. You'll see myself, John Farrell, Lisa Abramowitz, parsing total shock of a July cut, I guess the reality of a September cut. My answer is wait for the data and see if the labor market actually cracks. We'll have to see. With our news in New York City, Michael Barr.
Thank you very much, Tom. And John, former President Donald Trump seemed to back away from his earlier commitment to debate Vice President Kamala Harris. In an interview with Fox News and Laura Ingraham, he said he probably will debate, but he can also make a case for not doing it.
I want to do a debate, but I also can say this. Everybody knows who I am, and now people know who she is. She's a radical left lunatic. She'll destroy our country. She wants open borders.
Then why not debate her?
Well, wait. But because they already know everything.
Former President Trump says if he does debate Harris, he'd like to do it before early votes are cast. North Carolina Governor Roy Cooper has opted not to be a candidate in Kamala Harris's running mate search. Meanwhile, Cooper was part of a progressive fundraising group supporting Harris in a virtual rally called White Dudes for Harris.
We know that this country needs Kamala Harris more than ever right now.
The virtual rally is said to have raised about $4 million. Now that President Biden is no longer on the campaign trail, he is making a play for major Supreme Court reform in an appearance at the Lyndon Baines Johnson Library in Austin, Texas. We get that story from Bloomberg's Ed Baxter.
President Biden is calling for lawmakers to pass new binding ethic rules and term limits for the justices.
This nation was founded on the principle there are no kings in America. Each of us is equal before the law.
But Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell says it is not necessary.
President Biden and his leftist allies don't like the current composition of the court, so they want to shred the Constitution to change it.
McConnell says there are already ethics rules in place. Biden contends the current court has undermined long-established civil rights principles and protections. Ed Baxter, Bloomberg Radio.
At the Paris Games, organizers postponed the men's triathlon to tomorrow, citing insufficient water quality levels in the Seine River. In the overall medal count, the U.S. leads at 20. France has 16. Japan has 12. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Mike LaBarre, and this is Bloomberg Tom and John.
We were surprised that there's pollution in the Seine River. Did we not know about this beforehand?
Yeah. I've been right down next to that. I think it was in March I was there.
Yeah.
And, I'm no expert on this. You got to be kidding me. I give Mayor Hidalgo major cred for diving in
she did.
a couple weeks ago. But I'm just looking at the river and I'm
Has
going,
been seen since?
I don't. What's the river between Staten Island and New Jersey?
It was the Killville and Cole, the Arthur Kill.
The Arthur Kill. That's
Arthur
what it
Kill.
reminded me. That's what reminded me about. Okay, I know you're going to play the Jazz Chisholm audio later, but I'm sorry, folks. You're way ahead, so the other team doesn't want to waste a pitcher, so they put a catcher on the pitcher's mound. And Jazz Chisholm, who's not that, he's a bigger guy, he's a pro ball player, goes to the judge and goes, "Can I borrow your bat?" You gotta love that.
This young man, bless his heart, I like him. I mean, he's adding some fun to watching.
Runs.
Yeah,
2 home runs.
Yeah, one was a 2-run dinger.
But this is what it's about. I mean, not all this stupid, like, what should they do with a mound or that? Can I borrow the Giants' bat?
Meanwhile, the White Sox are like, the heck with it. We're just going to trade away the whole thing. I feel so bad for them.
I don't know what you do. I mean, how did Baltimore get better? And the answer is they did not trade away people.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we'll have to see. That's our baseball update. We'll do Jazz Chisholm's audio here. Michael Barr, just world class at giving us the best audio of what happened overnight as well. Futures up 11, Dow futures up 21. Note, we had the same action yesterday and ended up sort of ugly yesterday. Not ugly, that's maybe too much, but down. And the answer is we got a nice lift to the market. NASDAQ futures up 0.3%. BitDog, great interview yesterday with a real supporter of Bitcoin. And that was right at the edge of 70,000, now 66,000 on Bitcoin. Oil is a huge deal. We haven't touched on it yet this morning. Your gallon of gas is coming down at the Wawa. Brent crude under $80 a barrel, 79.48. From New York City, this is Bloomberg Surveillance.
markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And I'm John Tucker in the Bloomberg Newsroom with this Bloomberg Business Flash being brought to you by IBKR. Financial advisors switch to interactive brokers for lowest cost global trading and turnkey custody solutions. No ticket charges, no conflicts of your interests at ibkr.com/RIA. Start with some of the most actively traded in the pre-market shares of Procter & Gamble. They are down 2.9% after reporting quarterly sales that missed analyst projections. They have slowed the pace of price increases. Organic sales rising 2% in the quarter ended June 30th. The owner of Gillette Razors saying that was the slowest in about 6 years. And also shares of Pfizer in the pre-market, they're up 2.3% right now. The company saying it is raising its earnings forecast for this year. Right now, the futures indicate a higher open on Wall Street. Dow futures 24 points higher. The S&P E-mini futures up 11, and the NASDAQ futures right now, they are up 47 points. Two-year yield unchanged, 439. The 10-year is also unchanged at 416. We check the markets for you all day long right here on Bloomberg Radio. I'm John Tucker. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom.
John Tucker, thanks so much. The Summer Games in Paris. Our updates are brought to you by State Street Global Advisors. Look for our Summer Games update, very valuable over what's going on overnight and into the next day, this day being Tuesday. It is a Tuesday for Trump. It is a Tuesday for Harris. They adapt, they adjust. Joining us now, he's been of huge value to us, Terry Haines at Pangaea Policy here on the next step forward. I get a plan of exuberance, Terry Haines, from Harris. What's the plan from the Trump camp?
The plan from the Trump campaign, Tom, is basically to try to define Harris before she can define herself effectively. They see a window of about 3 weeks before the convention where they can present Harris not only kind of the word salad that everybody knows about, but also defining, I forget what Trump's exact words are, but, extreme, most liberal ever, so on and so forth, in an attempt, frankly, to blunt momentum and blunt the potential ceiling that she has, which is, quite substantial.
I look at this, and just as a vignette, and I have not seen the video, folks. Neil Cavuto over at Fox last night went after the senator from Louisiana, Mr. Kennedy, on the verbiage that seems to be used by the Trump campaign and Trump supporters against the vice president. Is everybody on the same page within conservative America, or do you see the divides, Terry, even greater as you've laid out for the last 2 years?
Oh, I see the divides as in terms of the message is all over the place right now, and there isn't a clear signal from the Trump side about what they what they prefer. So therefore,
right.
You're getting very scattershot kind of words, and by comparison, the Harris folks have been very disciplined on that.
Terry, John Tucker here. The question: are you going to ask him about property taxes?
Oh yeah, is SALT coming back? In the hunt for vice president, I'm hearing now the name of the Minnesota governor, Tim Walz. Who is he, and does he counterbalance the idea of the liberal San Francisco Democrat?
Governor Walz seems to be beloved of progressives, and for that reason alone, I think I'd discount his chances. What Harris needs is balance on the ticket. She needs it both geographically, she needs it in terms of swing states, and she needs it in terms of the centrism. And I think Walz doesn't really fill much of those buckets. So I think that he's less likely than somebody like Shapiro, for example, like Whitmer, maybe.
Okay, so as the favorite son of Pittsburgh, Terry, you're going for Pennsylvania's governor with his 19 electoral college votes?
Well, no, favorite sonism doesn't have anything to do with it, really, John. It's much more that, I think last time I saw you all, I called this the Captain Obvious analysis, and that is that he fills the biggest electoral college need, and he also checks all of those other boxes as well. It's interesting to me that there's been somewhat of a backlash within Democratic circles about his unabashed support for Israel. I think that's a plus for him, frankly. That's ticket one way.
Terry, John Tucker has a one-item candidate, voter rather. All he cares about is a property tax in New Jersey and a repeal of the SALT. Are there a lot of John Tuckers out there on issues? When you look at the electorate of America, how much of us has one item, this is the way we want to be? Are we that focused, or are we more sophisticated?
We're more scattershot, I think. There's, I'd say most voters care about lots of different issues, and you see that, in the usual surveys that happen. There aren't that many that think only one thing is important. I will say that I've been hearing, hugely from New York, New Jersey area folks for a decade now about SALT and whether it might one day come back, and so that seems to be a myopic focus of your particular area.
It seems to be very myopic, particularly to my right here in the Bloomberg studio. Terry, let's go then to the border. And does the gentleman from Arizona have a strength for Vice President Harris because he's in Tucson, some 100 miles from the border?
I think it's less likely that Senator Kelly gets it because of the
really?
Because of the and also less likely because of Arizona. If you look at the swing states, Arizona seems a little bit more out of hand than and less gettable, I would say, than some of the others. Although I think it's very much in play. But comparatively speaking, the Harris people seem to be emphasizing what they call the blue wall of Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania. That seems to be where their focus is. And although Senator Kelly, I think, would be a fine candidate.
When do I get the polls that are really going to tell me about how this new lineup is faring?
I think not until after Labor Day, John. And the reason why is that, what you see here, and it's something I've hammered for a while, but registered voter polls, I think, don't tell you very much, and that's pretty much all you've got right now. I mean, I've seen likely voter polls occasionally, but registered voter polls are like, I'm thinking about maybe going to see that movie over the weekend, as opposed to the people who are actually going to go see the movie. It is less interest to theater owners and movie studios who might see, as opposed to who's likely to see. So I think it gets distilled down starting after Labor Day. Well, before then, you're not really running those polls.
Just quickly here, Terry Haines, is it as simple as it's old style? I'll use Reagan, but I could use any other candidate as well. You entrench the base through August, get into September, and there's a miraculous amendment the second week of October where you move to the middle. Are we that old school?
Well, yeah, I mean, both of these campaigns start from the premise that their bases are not secure, which is interesting because they're always talked about as if they are, but they're not. They're constantly doing things to try to lock down their base. But then they kind of move to the middle, and you'll see Harris start to move to the middle with the vice presidential pick, I think. Trump, in contrast, I think, has given up his chance to bridge by picking Vance, and I said so an hour after he got picked. He doubled down on, I think, more small ball, and it's going to come back to bite him.
Terry Haines, thank you so much with Pangaea. An update there, and really careful advice, I think, to maintain the certitude until we get into September and October as well. Let me do a data check here. We look at equities, bonds, currencies, commodities. The VIX quiescent 16.55. That'll be a good barometer to watch as we move through a huge news flow to Friday. Same thing with a 10-year real yield, 1.91%. That's in from where it was 18 hours ago. And for that to break under a 1.89, 1.88 would be a huge deal. We're not there yet. We're still within that range. We've had a number of people saying we will stay within the range. The 2-year yield, the Sweeney yield, 4.39%. The 10-year yield, 4.16%. That ebbs in a little bit. Very careful watching there. And it really, as I said before, on oil, it's not getting nearly the visibility it should. American oil, 75.31, threatening 74 a barrel. Brent crude under $80 a barrel, From New York City, John Tucker, Tom Keene, Bloomberg Surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And I'm John Tucker in the Bloomberg Newsroom with his Bloomberg Business Flash. The mega cap earnings and the Fed interest rate decision, we'll get that tomorrow, will be critical in shaping the trajectory of the market. Right now, the S&P 500 and NASDAQ futures gaining ahead of the release of consumer confidence data and also the job opening labor turnover survey. That data we're getting today. And in the most active in pre-market, you have shares right now of Procter & Gamble. They are lower. Procter & Gamble shares falling about 3.2%. Quarterly sales missing analyst projections. They slowed the pace of price increases at the consumer products giant. Also, in the pre-market, you have shares right now of New Jersey-based Merck beating Wall Street profit estimates. Its blockbuster immunotherapy, Keytruda, that continues to dominate the market for cancer medicines. Right now, the Dow futures 23 points higher. S&P mini futures up 11. The NASDAQ futures right now 52 points higher. As far as yield space, the 2-year, which is more policy reactive, 438. That is down 1 basis point. The 10-year yield at 416. And we check the markets for you all day long right here on Bloomberg Radio. I'm John Tucker, and that is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom.
That data check was on the Educare and Moscow quality.
It was that good, you think?
It was that good. You nailed it.
Lisa will be back next week.
Mandy was taking notes. Joining us now, the most important interview of the day. How many of us have loaded the boat in our retirement plan, whether we like it or not, with Mandeep Singh kind of stocks? Mandeep Singh Definitive at Bloomberg Intelligence. Okay, Google, 13% revenue growth. I'm looking at Microsoft on the Mandeep Singh Bloomberg terminal. 14, 17, 18. They had a moldy year, 7%. They bounced back 14% revenue growth. Are these guys going to ebb away revenue growth like we just saw from Procter & Gamble selling shampoo?
Well, so I think in the case of Microsoft, the fact that they've got multiple business lines, and when you look at, how pervasive they are when it comes to rolling out generative AI, whether it's on the infrastructure side or on the Copilot side with their Office install base, It tells you they've got multiple levers to pull when it comes to sustaining that mid to high teens top line growth. And to me, Microsoft right now is the best position play when it comes to generative AI, simply because they did all the things right when it comes to partnering with OpenAI and then doing the CapEx
36 times earnings here in Microsoft. Everybody's in a modest panic about this, Mandeep Singh. There's no other way to put it. You have pro knowledge. How do you perceive the uninformed or less informed panic of the street?
Well, so look at the CrowdStrike outage. I mean, the fact that it impacted Microsoft operating system, that's a risk. And so those are the sort of things when a stock is trading at 35 to 40 times forward earnings, you have to ask yourself how much goodness is priced in. And will there be room to drive further estimate revisions? I mean, that's a question that everyone is asking tonight. Will there be an upside catalyst to estimates? And there probably is. It's just how much upside can you see from here in terms of estimates? That's
Mandeep, I want to bring in John Tucker because he is still using his Nokia 7200.
Okay.
From a few years ago.
The contribution to Azure from AI, what, it was 7% last time? What are you looking for this time around?
It has to accelerate sequentially. When it comes to momentum, these are the things that really matter for the street. So you're right, generative AI contribution is extremely important, but what you want to see is that revenue contribution going up quarter over quarter, not only just year over year, quarter over quarter. And that's paramount when it comes to sustaining the momentum in the stock.
And as you mentioned, they've had a head start in this area with ChatGPT.
Look, I think Amazon seems to be catching up, and Amazon is still bigger than Microsoft. So given both of them are reporting the same week, you want to see how much does Microsoft still have a lead when it comes to the Gen AI piece of it.
Can one stock turn this all around?
Well, so if
turn it around, we've barely gone down. We've had like a mini Mandeep,
Is that what we call it?
What are you? I mean, you're out of your 201k. You've done well the last 12 months, right?
I've been firmly latched onto the Russell 2000.
Have you?
Because they tell me. They tell me to look at it.
So you've had a very good 12 weeks. Are there any small cap Microsofts?
Well, so you have to look at the Gen AI application side of it. And that's where, what this technology has showed us is you require tons of CapEx. I mean, we're talking about Microsoft raising their CapEx guide further. So it just goes to show what kind of moat these companies have in terms of the balance sheet they have and the free cash flow they generate, because that is what allows them to buy these chips. And for, small caps, I mean, OpenAI, if they go public, they'll do very well. So Anthropic, another company, these are all private companies, but if they were to go public, they could be the next $100 billion company. Who knows? But I think it will be in Gen AI. It won't be in any other market given, this is a secular trend.
Could you just jargon alert, what is Gen AI? There's people out there going, what's he talking about? Well, what's Gen AI?
I think what we have hit on is AI's ability to not just learn patterns, but also generate all sorts of text, images, videos through prompts. And that is what was missing with the AI that companies were using
So
before.
on my Google, the new clutter I have at the top of Google search, is that Gen AI?
But it can give you a precise response as opposed to you going through
Right.
the links to find it.
And so what this is, John, if I type in on Google search on the deck menu, I used to just get like the menu. Now I get that the avocado lobster is the best thing on the menu. That's Gen AI.
Man, team, what's the correct balance between AI and the other stuff? Say, take data center spending, for instance.
I mean, there's always, initial CapEx. It's front loaded when it comes to technology. That's what we are seeing here, companies procuring those chips. There will be a digestion period. And that's where the software companies would do well. Right now, the software space is beaten up because everyone thinks it's going to have an impact on their gross margin. Like if they have to buy this capacity from Microsoft, it's going to hurt software companies, the pure applications software companies' gross margin. So eventually, once the prices come down for NVIDIA chips, that's when the software companies will have the real mode and the real subscription revenue. But we are probably a few quarters away from that.
Okay, if you roll in Amazon and Apple later this week, what's the big picture?
I think Apple is in a tough spot simply because of their consumer exposure, their China exposure, the fact that supply chain is a problem for them. So really the refresh cycle is a hope that everyone is pinning on the stock, but they just don't have that levers that a Microsoft has or an Amazon have when it comes to the cloud side of the equation. And that's what's missing in Apple.
With the moonshot that Microsoft has had, and you can look at the moonshot from October of 2022, or you can go back years. To give you an idea, Mandeep, to go -2 standard deviations on a monthly chart of Microsoft, it can go down 52% and still be within the 2 standard deviation channel. I mean, these are moonshot stocks. Some listeners and viewers have enjoyed the ride. Speak to those people now why they need to stay on board versus risk a within trend -52%.
Well, so I think in the case of Microsoft specifically, I would call out this trend is a multi-year trend. And look, we did have a drawdown back in 2022. It could happen again if the valuation multiples compress and all these companies find they can monetize AI. Right. But we definitely are not seeing any proof points of that yet.
What's Satya Nadella's biggest headache?
Just getting those NVIDIA chips. I mean,
really, it's as simple as. Are you kidding me?
No.
Microsoft is worried about getting NVIDIA chips.
Well, so right now, NVIDIA is making sure they allocate that capacity equally across hyperscalers, across private companies, and that's why it's still supply constrained.
Oh, come on! You don't think they're like at the Seattle Mariners baseball game? They're behind the dugout. They got rock star seats. They're not in the glass boxes up top. Satya's down watching it, and he's like going to, what's his name, Justin? Who's the head of NVIDIA? Jensen.
Yeah.
Come on, Satya's sitting with Jensen going, give me a couple boxes.
Well, Jensen's biggest risk is these guys start competing with them in terms of developing their own chips, which is what Amazon is doing. Amazon is not getting the same capacity of NVIDIA chips as a Meta is, because Amazon is developing their own chips.
Well, Tucker, who's informed, mentioned Azure. Is that what it is?
Yeah. What's the magic numbers, the year-over-year sales growth? Something like 30%?
Yeah, 30% is I would say the buy-side bogey is probably 32%, than the 30% that consensus number is. So clearly, anything less than 32% will be.
So to close the loop here, because Bar's coming in, he's all Jazz Chisholm. I can't even explain Jazz Chisholm, Mandeep. But the answer, Mandeep, is if they develop Azure, is that how you pronounce it, John? Azure?
Close enough.
Azure. If they develop Azure, do they get less NVIDIA chips?
Well, their own chips, if they start using in Azure. So
Azure.
In the end, it comes down to how do you power the cloud and what is going in your data center. Right now, NVIDIA chips are the most important and the most expensive component of those data centers.
Right.
So if you can replace it with your in-house chips, which is what Amazon is doing, that's going to be a big headwind.
I wish you were here every day. Thanks for coming in the studio over the Wheatstone Bridge. Mandeep Singh with Bloomberg Intelligence this morning with our news in New York City. Michael Barr.
Thank you very much, Tom and John. Former President Donald Trump seemed to back away from his earlier commitment to debate Vice President Kamala Harris. In an interview with Fox News, he questioned the value of a meetup and said he probably will debate, but he can also make a case for not doing it. We get more with Bloomberg's Bill Ferries.
He certainly seems to be trying to keep his options open. He says, yes, I'll debate, but, I may not. The official line has been that the Republicans are waiting for the Democrats to officially make Kamala Harris their nominee. That should happen by, I think, August 7th is the date for that. But yeah, there's some hemming and hawing about whether it'll take place. Maybe there'll be adjustments to the date, the September 10th date. Trump has also said he'd like to see it hosted by a different network than ABC.
Bloomberg's Bill Ferries. The clock is ticking for presumptive Democratic presidential nominee Kamala Harris to pick a running mate with her party's convention just over 2 weeks away. North Carolina Governor Roy Cooper has taken his name out of consideration, saying this just wasn't the right time for North Carolina or for me to potentially be on a national ticket. California's Park Fire is now the sixth largest in the state's history. It has grown to 368,000 acres. Cal Fire Public Information Officer Sergio Arellano.
There was a lot of fuel in the area where the fire started, and coupled with the winds, where we've seen a little rise in wind, over the previous fire seasons, that I think it was just the right recipe to get this fire going and going really quickly.
Fire official Arellano says the blaze was started by a man who pushed a flaming car into a gully. Concerns about water quality in the Seine River led organizers of the Paris Games to postpone the men's triathlon. By the way, overall medal count, the U.S. leads at 20, France at 16, Japan at 12. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr. This is Bloomberg. Tom and John.
Michael Barr, thanks so much. Rob Carolyn's off. He's like the French. He takes 4 weeks off in the summer. Our wonderful meteorologist. The haze thing, I'm looking out the window at night, and I really don't see the haze yet. I'm looking at a wonderful New York Times description here of air quality and all that. And I guess Minneapolis, which you'd expect up by the Canadian border, is getting it. But John Tucker, you really follow this. I mean, are we in for a haze thing to come?
Well, remember, smoke from wildfires, it can actually encircle the entire planet within a period of 24 hours, regardless of where the fires are located. Interesting. I do the reports for WCBS, the local station here in New York.
You're
in the mornings.
Iconic.
The chopper was having trouble getting up, the traffic chopper, because of the smoke.
You're serious?
In New York? Yeah. Absolutely.
Fascinating. John Tucker from WCBS. Good morning. From New York, Bloomberg Surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And I'm John Tucker, the Bloomberg Newsroom, with this Bloomberg Business Flash. Futures indicate a modestly higher open on Wall Street this morning in the cash open. Checking shares, Procter & Gamble in the pre-market, they are down 4%. They have been slowing the pace of their price increases. That's good for you, the consumer. Bad for the results. P&G reporting quarterly sales that missed analysts' projections. And right now, the Dow futures 6 points higher. The S&P E-mini futures 12 points higher. The NASDAQ futures right now 66 points higher. And the close of regular trading today, we'll get results from the next of the magnificent cohort, Magnificent 7 cohort of stocks. That's Microsoft. Key number there is the sales growth in the Azure unit. Wall Street expecting to see 30% year-over-year growth for the segment in the fiscal fourth quarter. That's a Bloomberg compiled consensus there. Right now, Treasuries, the yields are lower. The 2-year yield is down 1 basis point ahead of the 2-day Fed meeting. Right now at 4.38. The 10-year yield, 4.16, pretty much unchanged there. And we check the markets for you all day long right here on Bloomberg Radio. I'm John Tucker. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom.
John Tucker, thanks so much. Bloomberg Surveillance this morning is brought to you by Interactive Brokers, their bond marketplace. Access their vast selection of over 1 million global fixed income securities, no markups, no built-in spreads, and low transparent commissions. Learn more at ibkr.com/bonds. And we thank Interactive Brokers for foundational support of what we do here in equities, bonds, currencies, commodities, and Roz Matheson's empire of Bloomberg government. Joining us now from London, Roz Matheson, to say she's news director of Bloomberg News, barely describes how she's built our government platform worldwide. Roz, I assume you've been to Caracas. I saw a map today on Twitter, which was my childhood. And for those of you younger, like Roz, all I can say is there was a day when Venezuela was the richest country out there and Chile was the poorest. And now it's completely flipped because of X number of years of Maduro. Roz Matheson, now what for the decades of Maduro that we've seen?
Well, that is the real question. Now what? I mean, the opposition is disputing the result. As we know, they say they've got evidence to show that the opposition won the election, which is entirely possible that they do. But what can come from that, aside from saying that they won the election? Because we saw these protests last night. They quietened down pretty quickly, and the opposition's being pretty careful at the moment. I mean, they're calling people to come out today for these citizen assemblies, but they're calling for families to come out. So that's not suggesting they expect to have mass riots or anything occurring. Right. So what kind of movement are they going to drive here? And just sort of saying that Maduro needs to respect the will of the people, what is that actually going to achieve? My history of this is to study always the military. Is the military linked or separate from Maduro? They're pretty intertwined, actually, and that is the one thing that's going to be very interesting to watch. There's no sign, really, at the moment that the military is moving away from supporting Maduro, but that's the body. As is the case in other countries around the world, if the military moves, then everything does move with it, because the popular, opinion of people may not shift anything here. If the military withdraw their support and truly do that, not just in small numbers, but in size, then we finally see some kind of movement against Maduro. But right now, we're not seeing any sign that they're moving away from him. But that is truly the key thing to watch.
That's the military. How powerful is people power in Venezuela?
Well, again, you can see that Maduro has been quite willing, you'd have to say, to allow his people to tolerate, a very high level of economic challenge. I mean, the situation that Tom was just pointing out in Venezuela has been desperate for years, and Maduro has allowed that. He's tolerated that for his own ability to stay in power. So is he going to be concerned about his people suffering even further economically or under sanctions or whatever? Possibly not. He just waits everything out. We saw that with the opposition under Guaido, for example. example. If he waits long enough, he tends to wait them out. And so would he allow, protests may happen, there'll be popular uprisings potentially, unless it really gathers that momentum that gets to the point where it tips over for him. And again, with the military involved, it's hard to see what's going to happen at the moment, at least in the short term, that could dislodge him.
Are there fears this sets the template for other countries in the region?
Well, there's always been, obviously, in the region, that link between, again, military and politics, and that concern about how far the military has its tentacles into politics and how much leaders, individually, lean on the military to give them that support. And so there's quite a sense of unease, obviously, in the region, given its history in some countries about that. But certainly, as we've seen elsewhere in the world, in parts of Asia, for example, the military has played that key role. And if the military, continue their support or withdraw their support, then you see that lead to become very vulnerable very quickly.
Right.
So there's obviously a template in other countries from that.
Does America, from where you sit, Roz, an unfair question with your purview in London, but can you discern an American, Latin American policy? I would suggest respectfully, we haven't had one since James Monroe, but inform me, do we have a Latin American policy?
Well, that's going to be the question, right? I mean, Joe Biden has how many months left in office, and if you're going to see something happen now, what is it going to look like? They took the pressure off a little bit because Maduro was saying he was going to allow free and fair elections. Do they put that pressure back on a bit? But more broadly, what is the strategy once and for all for dealing with Maduro from the US side? Because as you say, it's ebbed and flowed in recent administrations, and it could look very different again come January, because we could have a very different president in the White House in the US. So it's really a sense that there's not much momentum here for a strong robust US policy, you'd say, in the next 6 months.
John, I will get one more in here with Roz, but Roz, let me suggest to you that for Americans, Venezuela is that place south of Aruba. I mean, that's about as sophisticated as we get. That's how much things have changed from our childhood. John?
Well, how interconnected is the United States and Venezuela, and how delicate does this become for a potential Harris administration? How delicate is it, if at all, for a Trump administration?
Well, it's delicate for the globe, and to some extent, in part simply because of the oil that Venezuela has and the potential still to deploy more oil to the market, although it's hard to see under Maduro that that's going to pick up anytime soon. For the US election, it could be quite interesting because, of course, Kamala Harris, had led the charge under the Biden administration for a while on migration policy, and we've seen a large exodus of people from Venezuela in recent years, some of those coming into the US and feeding into that debate about migration. So does Donald Trump raise the question of what the Biden administration or an incoming Kamala Harris administration would do with an uptick in migrant inflow into the US from Venezuela? So it could really feed into the election debate when it comes to that migration question.
Roz Matheson, thank you. Brilliant. Thank you so much. From London here, a briefing on Venezuela. And we're efforting very busy guests right now, including Ricardo Hausman of Harvard and Shannon O'Neill at Council on Foreign Relations. We'll get them on in the coming days. Roz Matheson leading all of our government coverage. Every day, and sometimes I do more than a few, I put out a tweet of the day. I just put it out on Twitter. I'm going to describe this for Bloomberg Radio. We don't have the image up yet. Maybe we'll get that up, Ari, if we can. At the Olympics, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 young kids at the opening ceremonies, John, all looking at their cell phones. And in the middle of them, in a gray sweatshirt and a black hat, hiding, is 81-year-old Mick Jagger, not looking at his cell phone.
He doesn't have a cell phone?
No, but he could buy the cell phone company. But it's just a perfect statement on the generations divide. It's just exquisite photo. Rock History puts it out. Thank you.
Well, in addition to being the fashion police here at Bloomberg, Paul Sweeney also is the technology police. He will tell youngsters who are looking at their phone walking down the hall, that's just a bad look. And it really is. I got to agree with him.
It's a huge issue, and it gets worse.
What would Miss Manners say?
Well, it's not even Miss Manners. It's a societal. My big thing is like we got books all around the house. Read a book. They're here. Some houses don't have the luxury of having a book, but there you are. Read a book. Jazz Chisholm, I'm pumped. I'm a Red Sox fan. This is good for the Yankees.
Where did he come from?
It came from the Marlins, thank you. and he's like the real deal. And he hit 2 home runs last night. One of them, a freebie. But on our jazz, we're playing jazz. How about Spyra Gyra? You don't know who they are, do you?
We call it fusion jazz.
Fusion jazz, very good.
I was a jazz DJ in college.
Very good. Jay Beckenstein. Spyra Gyra. It's fusion for jazz.
This is Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keene and Paul Sweeney.
Are these stocks under-owned by institutional Wall Street?
A lot of these companies talking about generative AI.
With Lisa Mateo on markets.
Investors just worried about the ongoing sales slump in China.
And Michael Barr with news.
A ship traveling through the southern Red Sea has been attacked.
The best in economics, finance, investment, and international relations. This is Bloomberg Surveillance on Bloomberg Radio.
Good morning, everyone. John Tucker in for Paul Sweeney. Michael Barr, John Tucker in for Lisa Mateo. It's a summer week, except it's the busiest week of the summer, and the tech earnings begin with Microsoft here this afternoon. Mandeep Singh, thank you for an early morning visit. Learned a lot with that conversation on Azure and the rest of it in technology. John Tucker and Tom Keene to get you started on the day. We're going to get right to it. Really important guest to jumpstart this 8 o'clock hour. Thierry Weissman with us from Macquarie, and we'll do that here in a bit on global slowdown. We're in the Interactive Broker Studios, and we need a Bloomberg business flash from John Tucker.
All right, Tom, and futures indicate maybe a mixed open on Wall Street cash open. Right now, we are preparing for a raft of economic data releases. Tech earnings, central bank decisions will be critical in shaping the trajectory of the market. You mentioned Microsoft. That comes after the close of regular trading today. Among the key numbers to report there, sales growth in the Azure unit. Wall Street expected to see a 30% year-over-year growth in that segment for the fiscal fourth quarter. Right now, the Dow futures lower, down 15 points. S&P E-mini futures, they are up 10 points right now. That's up 0.2%. The Nasdaq E-mini futures, 56 points higher. That is up 0.3%. The start of the two-day Fed meeting. Results tomorrow from the FOMC may indicate, they may show us the way to a September rate cut. Right now, ahead of that, the two-year more policy reactive, 1 basis point lower. That's at 438. The 10-year yield unchanged, and that is at 417. Among the most active in the pre-market shares, Procter & Gamble, they're down 4.5% right now at reporting quarterly sales that missed analyst projections. And we check the markets for you all day long right here on Bloomberg Radio. I'm John Tucker, and that's your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom?
Thanks so much. We're going to stop the show right now and forget about the fun fest of getting from Tuesday to Wednesday, 3 days of jobs data, the jobs report. We get the Fed tomorrow and all that, and just pause in the summer of 2024 with the most qualified. Thierry Weissman joins us right now with Macquarie, iconic at Bear Stearns years ago, always writing on foreign exchange, but with a far larger view to the global economy. I just did a Damien Sassower imitation, and on the Bloomberg, looked at the trends in the dynamics of 5, 6, 7 Asia currencies, forgetting about India just walking away to Indian rupee weakness as well. I got Brent under 80. I got West Texas Intermediate giving me a 74 print by the time you leave the building. Are we in the middle of witnessing a global slowdown?
Absolutely. It's led by China, certainly, but it's not.
But not to interrupt, but I don't think anybody's talking about this. Am I right?
People are talking about bits and pieces of it, okay? So there's no one out there who's not talking about the slowdown in China. I think that has been all over our radar screens for the past year. And that's been in evidence in respect of their PMIs, of their credit growth, of their consumption, their retail sales. That has been around and has been very clear to the market. I think when you say that people aren't talking enough about it, maybe what they're not talking enough about is the U.S. slowdown and the European slowdown. These have different characteristics, however. The European slowdown, to the extent that it's an industrial complex slowdown, is almost certainly driven by that China slowdown, because where you're seeing it happen is in Germany in the industrial complex. Manufacturing in Germany has been in a slump. Demand from China has been poor, and there's been an overhang of excess capacity in manufacturing from China that's affected German pricing power in manufacturing. There's a slowdown there for sure. The service sector economy in Europe is not doing as badly. In the U.S., we've had softer hiring. We have had initial claims rise. We have had our industrial complex slow down. There are definitely pockets of a slowdown in the U.S. You're seeing it even in the context of the corporate earnings guidance and reports that have come out for the second quarter. A lot of them are soft, and a lot of them are soft in the consumer space. So I would say, yes, we're having a slowdown in the U.S. as well.
If everybody's slowing, the question, I guess, is everybody slowing at the same rate? Because that makes a big difference in terms of differentials.
So it's not at the same rate. I don't think that the U.S. is going to see the kind of poverty we've seen in European growth in Q2, which was barely above 0%. I think the U.S. is still going to print something close to trend, let's say, in Q3. But for the U.S., that's still a market slowdown from the twos we saw in the first quarter and the second quarter. But I want to stress here that this is not a broad-based slowdown in the sense that it's affecting both the service sector and the goods sector in every country that matters. It's mainly a manufacturing and goods slowdown. That's the case in Germany, and it is the case which drives the rest of Europe effectively, and it's also the case in the U.S. The service economy in the U.S. and the service economy in Europe is still doing okay, and that is what is holding up growth to the extent that it is being held up in both major economies.
What's the story in China? What is behind that slowdown?
Well, it's a balance sheet driven story. You've had a property sector crash. It has stressed the credit economy. Banks are not willing to lend as much as a result of their impaired balance sheet. That has translated into poor sentiment as well for the household sector. They're seeing their wealth come down because property prices have collapsed. So that it's a propagation of an effect that began with the property sector and the bubble popping.
But I just mentioned this to Ross Matheson, the Chile-Venezuela dialectic over 30, 40 years. It's just amazing to see that. It's something years ago at Bear Stearns, you and Emmy Shio did. Okay, great. If you go to China and you say they have a different regime, this is not Schumpeter 101, they can't clear the market like a normal economy in China. That's the heart of the matter.
Yeah, most of these adjustments take place by virtue of asset prices dropping, Tom. And we have to see a clearing of the market in China from property prices dropping in China to reflect the overhang and the excess supply of property. The problem with that is that it's very painful, right? When you see, when most China households are over-invested in property and under-invested in things like bonds and like the stock market, the household sector becomes particularly sensitive to the drop in property prices, and you have to go through a period of pain. And I think China is in the process of going through that pain. But remember, government policy is working to prevent that adjustment to some extent, to smooth it out, to draw it out, and that's why it will not be as deep as it otherwise would be, but it will be extended nonetheless.
Okay, well, let's cut to the chase with our listeners and viewers. Let's assume all central banks are fighting one of the last wars. At some point, on an ex-post basis, the Fed's going to show up and join a global slowdown, global disinflation, and the rest. How will that affect asset prices of the haves in America?
Well, you're already starting to see it affect asset prices in the sense that the stock market is staying high here and multiples are staying elevated, despite the fact that we have an evidence slowdown taking place, and despite the fact that corporate earnings guidance has been quite poor in the last few weeks. If it wasn't for the fact that the Fed is anticipated to cut rates, I think the stock market would be a lot lower in the U.S., and you would have seen that adjustment in asset prices already.
Well, and commodity prices, what's the story there?
Well, that's an artifact of the slowdown in China for the most part, right? China continues to be the biggest buyer of commodities globally, and it is not just oil. We've seen copper prices come down. We've seen iron prices come down. Speaking of the emerging markets, that has impaired the terms of trade of a lot of the commodity exporters. It's one reason why the Brazilian real, for example, is weak, is because iron prices are lower and soy prices are lower. So China is propagating not just to an industrial slowdown in Germany, it's also propagating to commodity prices, which is ultimately going to affect, or if it hasn't affected already, output and the sense of good times in some of these emerging markets.
And that'll feed into the disinflation story as well.
Well, absolutely, to the extent that commodities are important input into goods production. But keep in mind, if you're an emerging market like Brazil and you're seeing your currency depreciate because iron prices are coming down, you're going to feel more inflation, not less inflation.
Well, let's get back to the Dr. Wiseman wheelhouse. What are you predicting for dollar resiliency on a relative basis?
Absolutely. There's a few reasons for that. One of them is that if you do believe, and we're not necessarily of this view, but if you do believe that former President Trump is going to win re-election, we would associate that with a strong dollar outcome. And we would potentially associate a Harris administration with a neutral dollar outcome, a dollar that stays, let's say, where it is because policy doesn't change that much.
Come on, I got to cut to the chase.
Yeah, let's go.
If you get a Harris administration, are you predicting Dow 45,000?
we're not necessarily predicting a strong stock market on the back of it. We're not predicting a strong stock market
the
on the
general
back.
councils in Melbourne. The general councils.
No,
in
it's
Melbourne?
not. It's not that. First of all, it's a lot easier to predict what macroeconomic policy will imply for the dollar and for interest rates than it does for the stock market.
Right.
There are a lot of things that are going to drive the stock market, including corporate margins, which are going to be driven by what happens in commodity
Weissman's
prices.
talking here, John, and we got West Texas Intermediate. We're getting near 74 print. Terry Weissman, thank you so much. With Macquarie,
My
just
pleasure.
brilliant there on the global economy. Red and green on the screen, NASDAQ up fractionally 0.4%. With our news in New York City, Michael Barr.
Thank you very much, Tom and John. Former President Donald Trump has yet to commit to debating Vice President Kamala Harris. But in an interview with Fox News, he says he'll probably end up agreeing to a debate, though he says voters already know who they are. We get more from Bloomberg's Jody Schneider in Washington.
This is the kind of thing we see with the former president. He likes to kind of throw things out there and then see what the reaction is. So in this case, maybe the reaction is he's trying to see how the Democrats and the vice president react to this. She has said she wants to debate him. She's eager to debate him. So I think we'll have to see. These would not occur until after the nominating convention in the Democrats' convention in August, which ends the 22nd of August. So the earliest you could really see this happening is September.
Bloomberg's Jody Snyder. The Harris campaign has accused Trump of backpedaling on an agreement to debate on ABC News September 10th. North Carolina Governor Roy Cooper opted not to be a candidate in Vice President Kamala Harris's running mate search. Meanwhile, actor Jeff Bridges revived his iconic role as the dude in The Big Lebowski on a White Dudes for Harris virtual call.
I'm white, I'm a dude, and I'm for Harris.
Along with Bridges were actors Mark Ruffalo, Mark Hamill, and Bradley Whitford. More than 120,000 people were on the virtual call. The Harris campaign raised about $4 million from that virtual fundraiser. Opposition candidate Armando Gonzalez has announced that his campaign has the proof it needs to show he won Venezuela's disputed election handed to President Nicolas Maduro. At the Paris Games, organizers postponed the men's triathlon to tomorrow, citing insufficient water quality levels in the Seine River. Overall medal count, the U.S. leads at 20, France at 16, Japan has 12. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr, and this is Bloomberg Tom and John.
Helene Becker is scheduled to be with us today on the Airlines. Her colleague in crime, Stephen Trent, over at Citigroup. This is a great window in how you make 7.9% in a cup of coffee on Wall Street. They were long Alaska Air, short Southwest Air, and they've just covered that trade. So you believe Alaska Air is going up, and at the same time, you believe Southwest Air is going down. It's called a paired trade. In their case, a buy in a neutral stock. And the answer is they made a very nice near 8% gain here on that. They just cover out that trade because Southwest Air is going to force John Tucker to have an assigned seat. You can't elbow that poor grandmother.
Southwest is growing up into be a big boy airline. It looks like, anyway. But I don't have to pay for my bag still.
Yeah, well, that's and Lisa mentioned that as well. For Charlie Pellet, Surveillance Europe on $5 a day correspondent. It's a big deal. You know, the way Pellet rolls, 6, 7, 8 suitcases, it's a big deal on Southwest Air. Stephen Trent over at Citigroup closing out a successful Alaska Air over Southwest Air trade. We'll talk to Helene Becker on your travel headaches here in a bit. From New York City, Bloomberg Surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And I'm John Tucker in the Bloomberg Newsroom with this Bloomberg Business Flash. Ahead of the cash open on Wall Street, futures right now are mixed. Dow futures down 25. The S&P E-mini futures 11 points higher. And the NASDAQ futures right now up 61 points. Microsoft reports after the close of regular trading. The report's going to kick off a pretty critical week for the sector. The rotation out of mega caps has dragged the NASDAQ 100 down almost 8% from its high about 3 weeks ago. Microsoft setting the scene for reports from Meta Platforms, Apple, and Amazon later in the week. Investors also waiting the Federal Reserve interest rate decision. That comes on Wednesday. They will likely set up a rate cut for the September meeting. And as we look at treasuries right now, the benchmark 10-year yield, that is unchanged, 4.17. The 2-year yield, also unchanged right now at 4.39. Among some of the most active in the pre-market after their results, New York-based Pfizer, those shares are up 1.2%. And then you have Procter & Gamble down, extending their decline, seeing the pre-market down 5.3%. Quarterly sales missing analyst projections. And we check the markets for you all day long right here on Bloomberg Radio. I'm John Tucker, and that is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom.
John Tucker, thank you so much. In Bloomberg Surveillance, and I want to make you aware of our Summer Games updates. Our Summer Games updates, of course, on Paris, all that's going on there. Our Summer Games updates, they're brought to you by State Street Global Advisors. Look for those through the Olympics here. The Olympics going for what, like 6 weeks?
Something
it's
like that.
It's like forever. Like the people at the end, the people at the beginning leave and come back for the closing ceremony. I haven't thought of this yet.
Do they? I mean, athletes, when if you're early on, you go back home and then come back?
Back home, come back. But with a closing ceremony, do they go the other way up the River Seine? Do they head towards, Lyon or wherever?
Well, they better be careful. It sounds like the River Seine could catch fire at some point.
It could catch fire. No, it's not as bad as
That's what
Cleveland.
happens in New Jersey.
Come on,
there are rivers.
They're still on fire. Right now is the conversation of the day on this bull market. Ross Mayfield, again with the good friends at Strategist, has written up a beautiful note at Baird. He's their investment strategist. And Ross Mayfield, like a lead weight in the middle of your note, is a current bull market of 650 days. That's long, it's 2 years. In an average bull market of double, 1,311 days. And we're up 55%, and the average bull market's up 111%. Have we forgotten, Ross Mayfield, what a bull market is?
Maybe. I mean, to me, this is good news, right? Because the kind of negative sentiment or the disbelief that there could be more to come is the kind of thing that can fuel a bull market higher, right? We have earnings growing. And as you mentioned, just if it ended tomorrow, and we don't expect there'd be any reason that it would be historically short. So, maybe we have a little bit.
At the end of the day, how much you make, that's pretty important. Size up for us the earnings season so far and your expectations. We're about, halfway through?
Yeah, I think, let me zoom out as far as I can, because I think the biggest or most important takeaway is that earnings are growing again, right? I think we take for granted that for a couple years there, aggregate earnings were flat, right? We had some multiple contraction and then multiple expansion, but earnings in the aggregate were flat. And starting at the beginning of this year with Q1 and then seemingly continuing here, earnings are growing again, profit margins look solid. So big picture, right? We're having the earnings kind of backfill stretch valuations that we saw, in the first half of this bull market. Individual stories, though, a lot of dispersion. Expectations were high coming into this season, so small beats, misses are being punished more than usual. But again, I think it's all part of. I think it's bull market behavior.
Where are you on revenue dynamics? And with the Baird mandate of the middle of the country down to Louisville, do we get a revenue shortfall or revenue disappointment because of mid-cap, small-cap manufacturing weakness?
Yeah, I think we could get some sales and revenue shortfall, especially as disinflation traction really takes hold here. I mean, you have to remember that while inflation is bad for the consumer and everybody hates it, it's pretty good for top lines of U.S. businesses. And we saw that over the last, 3 or 4 years. I think the story now is much more about efficiency, about managing balance sheets, about managing costs. You mentioned earlier in the program how commodities are coming down. Oil is
Yeah,
so,
the Bloomberg,
so able to manage costs.
Ross, I'm glad you mentioned this. The Bloomberg Commodity Index, folks, is almost as grim as the oil pullback. So what does that signal when you see commodities like that?
Well, I think there's some demand weakness around the globe. I don't think this is a booming economy anymore by any metric, but it's a good enough economy for what we need to see out of earnings and out of the market. On the cost side of the balance sheet, you're also seeing wages at a much more manageable place for companies. So I think this is a much more about profit margin protection, about operational efficiency than it is top line growth, which is really what was a baton passing from earlier part of this.
Get one more
cycle.
in here, John.
Yeah, we saw with the results with Procter & Gamble, the pace of price increase is slowing. Good for consumers like me and Tom, but not great for the results. Are we going to see more of that?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, you've got a labor market cooling. The Fed is going to cut rates, but overall, the economy is cooling. You've got a spotty picture abroad. Weakness in China, questions in Europe. So yeah, I think we'll see continued top line weakness and disinflation in the U.S.
Thanks so much, Russ Mayfield, with us with Baird out of Louisville, Kentucky. They're investment strategists this morning. John, I think we've got to regroup here with the Microsoft earnings. I thought the conversation with Mandeep was just absolutely great, but I have to remember the base, even with the latest upsets, 7, 8, 9, 10 stocks, and another 480. And it's like two separate markets we're reviewing an earnings season.
We're about halfway through the earnings season.
Are we really? I didn't know that.
So, and if you look at the Bloomberg, the EA, the analysis of the earnings so far, the number of surprises, positive surprises, earnings surprises, number about 78% at this point of those that are reported.
Yeah, Gino Martin Adams nailed this, and that earnings and then goes up the income statement. There's actually some pretty good margin stories as well. The issues at the top line, a la Procter & Gamble this morning, where there's some form of stock-to-stock revenue disappointment. Are we going to see a revenue disappointment from Microsoft or Apple? And particularly, I think Mandeep made very clear he's watching Apple carefully.
And of course, one of the big questions, especially when it comes to the technology stocks, how much of this AI spend is going to pay off? Is it paying off now, or when does it pay off in terms of increased productivity or whatever?
Yeah, different spends. To me, it's Microsoft, like you said with your wonderful question, Azure, but there's lots of other AI companies where it's basically project-based, and we have no idea when they start to infiltrate and make money, make revenue. We've really no idea on that at all.
Does my job become like extinct, or does my role become more productive?
Of everyone listening here, out on YouTube, all I can say is Tucker's underselling it, because you don't say my job, John, it's your jobs. That plural, that Steve Jobs on the back end of it.
Only three today.
The answer is it's lifetime employment. They're going to be bringing you in with a walker.
See, I'm bucking the trend right now. I am Mr. Productivity. So you are the king
I'm
fighting
productivity.
AI by doing this.
Dale Jorgensen and company's up at Harvard University. Chip Jones is out at Stanford going, look at the productivity of John.
I'm an enhancer.
Let me save it with a data check right now. Thank you for the many comments out on YouTube today on the appearance of Mr. Tucker. We thank his team for allowing him to appear with us today. Paul Sweeney out getting his Vespa serviced. Red and green on the screen. Futures up 9. It's indeterminate. It's pulled back a little bit here in the last hour and a half here. Not as enthusiastic as what we saw this morning. Bitcoin off 1,000, 66,000. Rounded down. 2-year yield 4.39%. I'm watching the 10-year. It really hasn't cracked, but it's ebbing. 4.17%. I'm sorry, today, hydrocarbons. West Texas Intermediate, 75.43 the barrel. From New York City, Bloomberg Surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And I'm John Tucker in the Bloomberg Newsroom. This Bloomberg Business Flash. Stock futures right now, they indicate a mixed open on Wall Street. Traders preparing for a raft of economic data releases. You also get tech earnings starting off after the close of regular trading today with the next of the Magnificent Seven cohort of technology stocks. That would be Microsoft. The report kicks off a pretty critical week for the sector. Rotation out of mega caps has dragged the NASDAQ 100 down almost 8% from its high just about 3 weeks ago. Dow futures right now 34 points lower. That is down 0.1%. The S&P E-mini futures higher right now, up 8 points. That's a rise of 0.2%. The NASDAQ futures, they are up 43 points, a rise of 0.2%. Procter & Gamble reporting quarterly sales missing analyst projections. That stock among the most actively traded in the pre-market. Shares of Procter & Gamble right now down 5.25%. And we check the markets for you all day long right here on Bloomberg Radio. I'm John Tucker, and that is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom.
John Tucker, thanks so much. Housing data here in 30 minutes. The S&P CoreLogic, Case-Shiller, always important. Model there last 12 months up 6.6%. A little bit dated, a little lagged by a couple months. There'll be some more data today, but the frenzy starts tomorrow. ADP onto Thursday's claims, onto the jobs report, and in the middle of that, there's a Fed meeting. The Fed decides. Bloomberg Radio, myself, John Farrow, Lisa Abramowitz, looking forward to that. Our economic indicators, our study of the economy, always brought to you by Commonwealth, supporting more than 2,000 independent financial advisors with a 2-to-1 advisor to staff ratio, small firm attentiveness, big advisor impact. Go to commonwealth.com to learn about their consultative support and technology. What a joy here. And really, this is a smart conversation to buttress off of Ross Mayfield, who we just heard from Louisville. In London, Ben Laidler joins us with Bradesco BBI. Ben, what is the character of this bull market that we're in right now?
I think we're continuing to climb this sort of wall of worry. People are worried about tech. They're worried about inflation. They're worried about politics, you name it. But I think we're in the early innings of a new bull market, and I think it's very fundamentally driven by, we're seeing, I think, the best earnings season in 2.5 years, and the Fed is getting ready to cut interest rates in September, which I think will be an insurance policy to the economy, and I think will also support these high valuations.
My fundamental belief, Ben, which I think you've known for years, and folks, it was my theme, I think, 2 years ago, is corporations adapt. We in the media, Ben Laidler, are so focused on the Fed parlor game, this, that, econobabble, we just forget corporations will adapt. How will they adapt to a Chinese-led global slowdown?
Well, we have to remember that we are focusing on the best of the best. Whether it's the NASDAQ 100 or the S&P sort of 500, these are the survivors. These are the people, to your point, that I think can adapt, and I think have shown that they're well able to do that. So right now, we are seeing, if you like, a rebalance of earnings growth. Tech earnings growth, which has been the sort of one-legged stool of this rally, is beginning to slow, but it's been picked up by everybody else, and I think that's fundamentally, very, very healthy. What's driving that? I think if I had to put, one thing, it's the benefit of lower inflation. It's taking some pressure off profit margins. Now, not for everybody, but in aggregate. And that is, I think, wrong stepping, maybe some of the consensus, which are looking at this sort of tepid top-down revenue growth number, and mistaking or missing this expansion of profit margins. That's what's driving this double-digit earnings growth, and that's companies managing their cost base very well.
Among the data we're going to get this morning, the JOLTS, the job opening survey, and on the labor front, if things indeed are starting to slow, what the Fed kind of wants to see at this point, does that automatically mean that consumer spending is going to slow? And how does that affect your base case that maybe all boats will be lifted by this new phase of the bull market?
Yeah, absolutely. The consumer's slowing, and you can see that in the data. anyone looking at big ticket items, credit sensitive items, or even at the sort of lower income end of the consumption pyramid, there's definitely a sort of squeeze going on there. But I think that just means that the Fed is going to cut. And we do have this Fed put out there, which will support valuations, which will bring investors out of cash into the market, and will ultimately give you that economic soft landing and give us visibility on earnings. So, it's a classic sort of relatively bad news is actually a good news story, I think, because it gives us visibility on the sustainability of this bull market.
Have you changed your view on use of cash of corporations? I mean, Apple, maybe they'll reaffirm share buyback or whatever, but is use of cash different here than your arch Christmas Eve call of 2018?
Now, one of the things where the US really stands out is this dramatic use of share buybacks. I mean, this is by far the biggest buyer of US equities. It's not investors, it's companies. Right. And that's been a sort of unheralded support of this bull market. And to the extent that companies have more cash, because earnings are rising double digit, I think we're going to see more share buybacks. But at the margin, I would like to see more investment. I think we'll see it. I think companies have plenty of projects on their hands. I mean, we're seeing it particularly in AI right now. But, I would fully expect it over time to broaden out into these other more economically sensitive sectors, which we've started to see, right? Small caps is the sort of the canary in the coal mine of that beginning to happen.
Our advantage, Ben Laidler, and this is coming out of LSE in Cambridge years ago, is one of your shingles early on, Rothschild, and then to JP Morgan, where you ran all of LatAm strategy and research. That was a little bit ago, back maybe pre-Maduro in Venezuela. You're now at Bradesco of Brazil with Andre Carvalho, huge research excellence. In the last 24 hours, Ben Laidler, what has been the Bradesco view of the upset in Venezuela?
I think most investors are unfortunately spectators to this. Unfortunately, over the last 30 years, Venezuela has just shrunk to become a fraction the size economy, stock market, bond market that it used to be. Hopes are that ultimately this turns around and we see a reintegration of what used to be one of the biggest, richest economies in Latin America back into the region. But right now, I think, unfortunately, we're right at the beginning of that, or maybe at the very earliest stages of that.
Not to get you in trouble with your general counsel, but Ben Laidler, how can the U.S. help the people of Venezuela?
Equity strategists are very bad at politics, so I need to be a little bit careful.
Understood.
But I think it's very difficult. I mean, this has become a isolated autarkic country over the last 20 or 30 years, and I think as that process has unfortunately developed and got deeper, I think the policy, the levers that the rest of the world has have unfortunately just got less and less. So I think it remains a very difficult scenario.
Ben Laidler, thank you so much. Can't say enough about his LatAm experience. You have to ask those difficult questions. Ben Laidler, they're reaffirming a bull market call. John, there's huge sensitivities here about Venezuela. And I remember the day, I'm going to guess it was Reagan in my foggy memory, we invaded Grenada. I don't have that knowledge in front of me, but every time we turn to Latin America, we struggle. I mean, it's just that simple.
And do we still turn to Latin America as our backyard if we have a new administration that rolls in?
Well, it could be a new administration either. Some people would say, with Harris a new administration, Trump a new administration, but certainly this is in real time. Our leadership here is Roz Matheson. Stay with Bloomberg. Some really wonderful people at our offices in Caracas following what's going on in Venezuela, and we'll get some guests for you here in the coming days on that as well. Red and green on the screen, a real churn to the market. And John, you mentioned this earlier. I mean, you look at the decisive drawdown, the absolute panic on a weekly chart. We go from a daily chart to a weekly chart is a good habit. We're nowhere near support on the NASDAQ 100, John. That's the technology index, in case you weren't.
We say tech-heavy NASDAQ.
Tech-heavy, down 10%. Down 20%. So You could say the support is down 20%. I stand corrected. And the actual index now is down 7%. It's a dramatic drawdown.
And your much vaunted VIX, the Wall Street fear
not
gauge,
out to 20.
1653.
It's pretty
so
good.
That's not.
There've been times in the last 15 years where that's a spectacular number, and we've come back from 12 through 15, 16.53 on the VIX. That was the worst data check we've ever done. With our news in New York City, Michael Barr.
Thank you very much, Tom. And that was a very good. I love that data check. Thank you.
It was good. That was on the edge of Nathan Hager quality.
Okay, thank you, sir. Donald Trump says he expects to debate Kamala Harris. The former president hasn't committed to a debate, but he was asked about it on Fox News.
The answer is yes, I'll probably end up debating. I think actually the debate should take place before the votes start being cast.
Former President Trump says a case can be made for not debating Harris. And he also says that he has called the Harris camp and the vice president, quote, a radical left lunatic. North Carolina Governor Roy Cooper is taking his name out of consideration to be Kamala Harris's running mate. Sources tell Bloomberg News the vice president has at least 3 names on her short list, including Senator Mark Kelly and Governors Josh Shapiro and Tim Walz. At the Paris Games, organizers postponed the men's triathlon to tomorrow, citing insufficient water quality levels in the Seine River. In tennis, Coco Gauff lost in the 3rd round of singles. In the overall medal count, the U.S. leads at 20. France has 16. Japan has 12. Finally, in baseball, the Yankees beat the Phillies 14-4. Jazz Chisholm hit a 2-run home run to right field in the top of the 9th inning.
And Chisholm hits one in the air, deep to right. Castellanos turns around. There it goes. Adios, amigo. Smooth jazz. Jazz Chisholm, his 2nd home run of the night.
WFAN with the call. And folks, if you like your what for and why whippings, the Mets beat the Twins 15-2. Global news, right. 24 hours a day, and whenever you want it, with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr, and this is Bloomberg. Tom and John.
Thank you so much for that. We're doing some jazz here today for Jazz Chisholm. I think everybody pumped up by this. I watched Toronto-Baltimore yesterday for 20
that
minutes.
Pitch right in the face, right?
Right in the face. It was really ugly. Very brave, and the trainer did a great job. It was really quite good. Everybody remained calm. This is James McCann. He's the veteran catcher. Doubleheader. You put McCann in, and no whining. It was really, really something. But my point is with Jazz Chisholm is all these pitchers now have to pitch at 97. And their arms are wearing out. And I would say, Michael Barr, the pitcher that came in after that terrible accident was just up from Buffalo.
Yeah.
And you could instantly tell he didn't have major league stuff.
Oh, that.
And there's a lot of this going on right now. So you get a score like 15 to whatever.
Yeah. I mean, boy, that hit, though, just taken in the face. By the way, the Orioles, they split a doubleheader with the Jays. Yeah. Boy, that was just frightening to watch. And I just, full impact.
He went out to first base. And it was out on a ground out next. But it was really, really something to see. It'll be a highlight of the season with all its agony. But I'm just amazed at the lack of pitching. I mean, they're getting to be a lot of scores. The Red Sox, 20 runs in Colorado a while back.
Yeah.
I mean, this is like,
You didn't see that in the Bob Gibson, Sandy Koufax day. Nothing like that. I know.
And it's the whole pitching. They're studying this right now. Houston, they're doing a lot of work on this with, who are the Houston pitchers that left Detroit, John? I can't remember their names. They're out there. From New York City, Bloomberg Surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And I'm John Tucker in the Bloomberg Newsroom with this Bloomberg Business Flash. The major stock averages, the indexes, right now they are mixed, indicating mixed to lower open on Wall Street. Dow futures right now 30 points lower. The S&P E-mini futures, they're up 10, up about 0.2%. The NASDAQ futures right now 58 points higher. That is a rise of 0.3%. Of course, after the close of regular trading today, we're going to hear from Microsoft. The key number there, sales growth in the Azure unit. Wall Street expected to see a 30% year-over-year growth for that segment in the fiscal fourth quarter. Some of the other earnings we got today, setting the tone for the financial markets. Rahway, New Jersey-based Merck beating Wall Street profit estimates. Its blockbuster immunotherapy Keytruda continuing to dominate the market for cancer medicines. And Procter & Gamble, disappointing there, down over 5%. Those shares in the pre-market reporting quarterly sales missing analyst projections. Of course, today, the start of the two-day Federal Reserve meeting, FOMC decision tomorrow, probably indicating a rate cut for September. Right now, the 2-year yield, 10-year yield, pretty much unchanged. And we check the markets for you all day long right here on Bloomberg Radio. I'm John Tucker, and that is your Bloomberg Business Flash, Tom.
John Tucker, thanks so much. Greatly appreciated. Thank you for the many comments there out on live chat on YouTube. Greatly appreciated. You go out to YouTube. It's a new technology. Ed Ludlow doesn't know about it. You go out to YouTube. You subscribe to Bloomberg Podcast. You get all the value add, including this afternoon, Microsoft, where their earnings. Usually we talk to Ed Ludlow about Microsoft. No. Ed Ludlow, in the last 2, 3, 4 months, he's done a national value add. You bought a Tesla, right?
Oh, okay, here we go.
Redo didn't buy it for you, Keeper.
Comes straight out of my paycheck. Redo doesn't pay for it.
You bought a Tesla, and the head of Bloomberg Technology and all our San Francisco efforts has chronicled self-driving on a Tesla.
Yeah.
Like literally, it's a public good. When are we going to have confidence for a Tesla or any other car to be quote-unquote self-driving?
I don't know when we collectively will have confidence. I don't have confidence. So I lease a Tesla Model Y. I think I've discussed it with you on the show, right? I did it because it was the most affordable option at the time when I needed a car.
I was in one yesterday. Actually, it's very comfortable.
Yeah, very comfortable. And the lease is like, it's very cheap for and we can afford it. But I love technology. So my thinking was get hands-on with it. We write about and talk about full self-driving supervised software on air all the time. I don't think it's fair for a journalist to do that and not use it. So I've been using it a lot. And I have the latest version, 12.5.1. That was released, limited release Friday. It started to roll out widespread today, last 24 hours. And I took it for a ride Saturday, 30 miles from my home to San Francisco. There were no incidents bar one. So Golden Gate Bridge, iconic.
All it takes is one incident, by the way.
Well, exactly. So I get onto the Golden Gate Bridge. I'm in the correct lane. I actually the software changes lanes for me, and it spits me out the other side on the San Francisco side, and I'm heading toward the toll booth. There are 6 toll booths. Only 2 of them are open. Gets me in one of them that's open with a green arrow. Good start. But it says very clearly, do not stop, maintain speed 25 miles an hour. I get to the bollards, and the self-driving system slams the brakes, and I go down to 6 miles an hour. What's behind me? Dozens of cars shooting off the bridge, not at 25 miles or 40 miles an hour. I made the choice in the moment not to intervene. I should have done.
Were you listening to Jefferson Airplane or Grateful Dead all your life?
I was listening to Kenny G, classic 1986 album, Duotones.
Okay.
Just classic for the woodwind movement.
John lives this. On the Garden State Parkway, there's someone doing an Ed Ludlow experiment.
Well, no, it's
not working.
That's right. It doesn't take into account the other nuts who are behind you on the roadway.
Yes and no. It's a purely camera-based system, right? And there are cameras around the perimeter of the car. And so it literally does take into account the nuts around you based on what the camera can detect in vision and the speed they're moving at. I mean, I saw something on the Bloomberg terminal yesterday that I don't think I've seen in my career, which is Bloomberg's Craig Trudell writing up that truest analyst note. He reflected on his own experience where he almost had an incident, right? He almost had a crash. But what's the most amazing thing about that story is not just the details of his note and his thesis around Tesla, it's that story got almost 14,000 terminal reads in a single 12-hour day.
Yeah.
So people care, and I think that's why it's important we talk about it.
Peter Thiel tells a great story about getting in Elon Musk when he got his supercar way back when.
Right.
And he crashed it with him in the car. Didn't have insurance either, by the way.
So what's the relationship of Tesla, California to Texas? We all know the soap opera.
Right.
And say the California Department of Driver's Licenses. Is there a government watching of Ed Ludlow almost coming to death on the Golden Gate Bridge? Do they care?
That's a really excellent question.
It's my only good one of the day, so go with it, Ed.
The answer is that at the federal level, it's NHTSA, the National Highway and Traffic Safety Administration, who essentially police this. And different to other companies that you may or may not have heard of, for example, Zoox, which is owned by Amazon, or Waymo, which is owned by Alphabet, the parent of Google. What Tesla is doing is developing this technology through the consumer in the real world with a view long-term to operating so-called robo-taxi fleet. And what others are doing are testing vehicles where there is no driver in the front seat and the consumer sits in the back, a genuine robo-taxi. And that answers the jurisdiction question, that because this is going through the consumer, it's largely NHTSA that is adjudicating the development of it and the risk in real time. In this country only, I should say.
Crossing 57th Street this morning at 3 a.m. They've milled the roadway, preparing it for repaving. And there are no lines on the roadway. And this has been this way for 3 weeks. Typical in New York City, you get prepared to pave a roadway.
Yes.
It takes about 3 weeks after you
Now,
mill it.
John.
Well, no, it's the truth. AI is going to solve that problem for
Municipal
me?
finance isn't my
And go
my
across
area.
57th Street with no lines in the road?
So this is another excellent question. In the Truist note, the analyst recalls 3 incidents where he had to intervene because he felt unsafe. What the camera system is supposed to do is detect all elements of the road around you, including a white solid line. Now, on a freeway or a highway environment, the rules of the road in any state are that you must not change lane with a white solid line. In the analyst's note, the car chose to change lane of its own decision-making, breaking that rule of the road. Now, in the incident or the environment you've described, there are no lines. And so that's one of the things the camera-based system is supposed to use to help it navigate the world around it. It's another great question. It would use proximity to basically maintain a course, but of course it's not ideal.
Do you assume at some point that Tesla will continue this, reinvigorate it, or will they step aside and say, we just can't get it done?
They're all in. I mean, my sourcing at that company is that this is it, and you're either with it or you're not. I'll say something I've said to you many times, Tom, which is Elon Musk is often late, always late, but he gets there in the end. And to his credit, you know, it's not a perfect, safe experience. It's pretty astonishing, the technology. The difficulty for investors, many listening to this program, is I don't get the jump. How do I go from sitting in my own car where I partially allow it to drive itself to a future where Tesla operates a fleet like Uber of robo-taxis?
We've been unfair. Thank you seriously, Ed, for just this incredible real life coverage. I read it voraciously on the weekends. Ludlow's all I read. I don't read anything else. Microsoft this afternoon, what's your nuance at Bloomberg Technology?
Yeah, I call it this earnings season, do you understand the money machine? For every dollar you're putting in the machine, how many dollars are coming out? And Microsoft gave us a sense of that last quarter. Basically, they gave us a CapEx figure, and they said we had 30% top line growth on cloud, 7% of that came from AI. And for the street, that was kind of enough. But the concern is you're spending all this money, what do you have to show for it in terms of top-line growth? You guys probably have a longer-standing relationship with Microsoft than I do, with respect. It's been around since the mid-'70s. But what it's always been good at is selling software you could otherwise get for free. And that gives the market some confidence in that name. It's one of the most widely held stocks among institutionals and retailers on the planet.
We're doing it. We have a baseball player, the New York Yankees. It's a baseball team, Ed, and they have a new player that's wonderful called Jazz Chisholm. So I talked to your people, and I said, what does Ed Ludlow want in terms of jazz? And they said, Ed's just like all Kenny G. Is Kenny G jazz, John?
Well, that's open to debate. I would say no, but you know.
Ed Ludlow,
we
Bloomberg
have to respect
Technology,
our guests'
thank
wishes.
you. Because of Jazz Chisholm and Ed Ludlow, Kenneth G. Good morning.
This is Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keene and Paul Sweeney.
Apple's still minting more money than God, right?
Geopolitics front and center for global Wall Street.
With Lisa Mateo on markets.
Stocks are coming off of another record high.
And Michael Barr with news.
U.S. Secretary of State discussed the conflict in Gaza.
The best in economics, finance, investment, and international relations. This is Bloomberg Surveillance on Bloomberg Radio.
Good morning, everyone. Tom Keene, John Tucker in for Paul Sweeney, Michael Barr, John Tucker in for Lisa Mateo as well. Double mandate, double. It's like, so you get
triple
time
mandate,
and 3F.
triple mandate,
triple mandate, or all that. John Tucker.
It is the new productivity
for being with us. It's the new efficiency mandate that we have on Bloomberg Surveillance. I just have to wear the bow tie 2 days in a row, same one. Red and green on the screen here. The VIX 16.50, anticipating Microsoft. I thought Ed Ludlow was great on Tesla.
I'm afraid of autopilot. It's just like I wouldn't be able to relax in a car with autopilot.
We're years away. It's like science fiction. Remember Buck Rogers? You're too young to remember Buck Rogers. It's
well,
like
I'm
Buck
glad
Rogers.
You do.
Mike Green's laughing at me. Coming up, a really important conversation here, seriously, with Mike Green, and we'll do that with Simplify Asset Management. We're out on YouTube. Subscribe to Bloomberg Podcast. It's our new technology. You can self-drive over to YouTube and subscribe on Apple CarPlay on Android Auto as well with our Bloomberg Business Flash from the Interactive Broker Studios. John Tucker.
And the parade of earnings continues this morning. One of the themes that is developing, consumer companies facing an increasingly tough global profit backdrop. Procter & Gamble, case in point, among the most active in the pre-market, down close to 6%, reporting quarterly sales that missed analyst projections. The pace of price increases that has slowed, so that's hitting the bottom line there. Dow futures right now, 36 points lower. That's down 0.1% right now. The S&P E-mini futures up about 10 points, a rise of 0.2%. The Nasdaq E-mini futures 58 points higher, a rise of 0.3%. As the Fed begins a two-day policy meeting, concluding tomorrow, the FOMC likely to signal rate cut in September. We're seeing yields right now; they are relatively unchanged. And of course, as you mentioned, Tom, after the close of regular trading, the next of the cohort of Magnificent Seven stocks, Microsoft, will be delivering. The key number there to watch for: sales growth in the Azure unit. Wall Street expecting to see 30% year-over-year growth for that segment. And we check the markets for you all day long right here on Bloomberg Radio. I'm John Tucker, and that is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom.
John Tucker, thanks so much. Moments ago, oil cratered. We're down $1 now on Brent and West Texas Intermediate, down 1.2%. We're under 75 on West Texas. On Brent crude, I was at 81 going someday 80. Forget about that. 78.81 on Brent crude oil. Gold does nothing, up $6 right now. I take that over, I triangulate it with a 10-year yield, 4.17%. Quiescent, really hasn't moved. And I'm watching very carefully the 10-year real yield, 1.91%, still within range.
And I don't put crude oil in my car. I put gasoline at the Wawa, $3.15 a gallon.
What's that like?
That's good. And that's like that electronic billboard on the highway flashing $3.15 that tells me and the other consumers who are driving the highway.
So you're going to see $2.99 before Labor Day?
It's quite possible. And
right.
How does that affect my vote?
How's the coffee at Wawa?
Excellent. It's one of my favorites. Not quite Dunkin' Donuts quality, but Wawa is a close second to Dunkin' Donuts.
Your Garden State Parkway view today. Joining us now, hugely anticipated, Mike Green joins us, Chief Strategist at Simplify Asset Management, always thinking about the market for various and sundry firms, including Canyon, over the years. You have, and you know, Mike, how I feel about this. I hate the modern parlor game of the Fed. And the parlor game exists because we have data, and we can go to our Bloomberg and look at the data, and we're more certain ourselves because we've got the data. And now we're data dependent, and you liken it to two drunks, the dual mandates at the ex post bar of the Fed.
Yeah, we're definitely staggering home trying to solve both unemployment, which we're not entirely sure what it is and how it's caused, and we're trying to solve inflation, which we freely admit we're not entirely sure how to fix it or solve it.
And you mentioned the blinder op-ed here in the Wall Street Journal is the example. So how does that fold into the July-September guessing game of those in the parlor?
So I think we're now at a point of decision where the Fed is likely to go ahead, barring some catastrophic reading that comes through. But the important point that Blinder is making is that we've changed the seasonality. Just the methodology with which we produce the data on inflation is influenced by the prior behavior of prices. The last revision basically adjusted for the time period from 2017 to 2022, which includes the nonsense around COVID. This has shifted seasonality dramatically. It raises prices or raises inflation numbers that we're getting in the fall and early spring, and it's lowering them in the summer. That's creating conditions where we could come into the fall, even as underlying inflation continues to fall, and suddenly we see a hot CPI print again, derailing the question of is the Fed going to cut despite the very obvious need to do so.
And the inflation fight, it comes at the expense of jobs?
It can, right? It becomes a question of what are we actually trying to diagnose? And this is one of these really weird situations in which the map becomes the territory. We're not actually looking at what's happening in the economy. Instead, we're turning around and relying on the data, which was the point that Tom was making, that we confidently receive from government agencies that are printing this. Now, most people think there's giant conspiracies around this. It's really just mechanical inputs, right? When you have thousands and thousands of employees who are doing this, you have to have rules around how you construct it. Those rules are built for time periods of stability, and the last 5 years have been anything but.
If we're not data dependent, then we're what, anecdotally dependent?
Well, anecdotes are data in one form or another, right? But we need to actually have a theoretical model and an understanding of what's really going on. We are looking at components of inflation that are deeply lagging, things like insurance, that insures the value of the car as of last year, right? That relates to behaviors of consumers who are increasingly stressed and deciding to, sue people for compensation in a variety of ways. We're seeing this insurance fraud is rising. Those are not inflationary. Those are market pressures and market powers. And the answer to them, of course, is fewer people drive cars. That's going to end up playing out even as the Fed reacts.
What does it do to assets? I mean, what we're talking here about, folks, is the difference between risk, where you can model what you've got, and outright uncertainty, where you can't model it. What does that do to asset prices?
So the uncertainty around the Fed's reaction function, or the uncertainty around do we have anything approximating an optimal path of interest rates, is ultimately just like sand in the gears of the system, right? It slows it down, it creates increased risks. You can err on the side of too liberal and too generous, as we may have done 10 years ago. Now we're on the flip side of that, and we're watching segments of the economy slowly wither away.
How restrictive are we right now?
I think it really depends on who you ask, right? There's no restriction for a company that is incredibly cash rich like Microsoft. There was a fantastic headline that Apple, made over $1 billion on its cash balance last quarter. They're not thinking about interest rates at all. They don't care. But there are many companies that are deeply distressed in terms of their access to credit, particularly at the small side.
So who's your study of who the Fed should listen to? To borrow a word from Pew Research, the topology of America, Jerome Powell has to choose who to adapt policy to. Obviously, it's not going to be Tim Cook. I get that. But who do they adapt for?
Ultimately, what we should be doing is adapting for the maximum ability to change, right? So the ability to accommodate the shifts that are occurring in our economy.
Right.
Right now, what we're doing is we're basically saying the answer is get prices down, or the answer is get inflation or get unemployment up. Neither of those are answers. Those are actually just data again.
We could go on for this for hours because, full disclosure, folks, I agree with everything Mike Green's saying. But to be direct about it, are we victims of Greenspan's measured? To me, the dampening, folks, I'm not going to go into the math of this, but there's a Brownian function and a drift function, and the answer is you dampen out, and that's a good thing. Basically, with a measured approach, we've dampened out our outcomes. That's the hope.
That is the objective, is to minimize the disruption that occurs, because when people become unemployed, you lose years of human capital, right? It's just that simple.
Right.
That's really the issue that we're dealing with. On the flip side of that, as Stan Druckenmiller pointed out many years ago, you can overdampen. Overdampening encourages excess leverage. And so it is a very tough job that the Fed has, and the simple answer is we're asking it to do way too much. We got a dysfunctional Congress. We've outsourced much of our policy making to monetary.
Are they affected by Lawrence Summer and Olivier Blanchard's great work on hysteresis, the long-term effect of unemployment, or are they just simply slaves to the Dallas trim mean or the PCE deflator?
I think, unfortunately, this is where it gets confused with political influence, right? It really depends on what people are worried about.
Right.
So in a low unemployment environment, they're very focused on the inflation number. That's what people are angry about.
Right.
In a high unemployment environment, you're going to have to flip that. And unfortunately, it feels very much like the risks of us flipping in the opposite direction are quite high now.
Bottle it. Mike Green, and it'll be out on Bloomberg Digital here today. Mike Green is with Simplify Asset Management. They're a pretty sophisticated discussion of the choice set that Jerome Powell and company have here. We'll do that tomorrow at 1:30. The Fed decides. With our news in New York City, Michael Barr.
Thank you very much, Tom and John. North Carolina Governor Roy Cooper is taking his name out of consideration to be Kamala Harris's running mate. Sources tell Bloomberg News the vice president has at least 3 names on her short list: Senator Mark Kelly and Governors Josh Shapiro and Tim Walz. But Pangaea Policy founder Terry Haines says the Minnesota governor might not last.
What Harris needs is balance on the ticket. She needs it both geographically, she needs it in terms of swing states, and she needs it in terms of, the centrism. And I think Walz doesn't really fill much of those buckets. So I think that he's less likely than somebody like Shapiro, for example, like Whitmer maybe.
Terry Haines of Pangaea Policy on Bloomberg Surveillance. Former President Donald Trump has backed away somewhat from his earlier commitment to debating Harris. Trump says he would probably debate, but he can also make a case for not doing it. There are fears over a broader regional war in the Middle East after Israel promised retaliation for a missile strike that killed 12 children on a soccer field in the Israeli-controlled Golan Heights over the weekend. Hezbollah has denied being behind the attack. Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin asked about renewed fears that the Israel-Hamas war will spark a wider conflict after the deadly weekend airstrike in Golan Heights.
I don't believe that a fight is inevitable. I think that, we'd like to see things resolved in a diplomatic fashion.
Secretary Austin answered questions during a news conference in Manila following security talks in the Philippines alongside Secretary of State Blinken. At the Paris Games, organizers postponed the men's triathlon to tomorrow, citing insufficient water quality levels in the Seine River. In tennis, Coco Gauff lost in the third round of the singles. In the overall medal count, the U.S. leads at 20, France at 16, Japan at 12. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with the Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr, and this is Bloomberg. Tom and John.
Michael from Detroit emails in John Tucker, and he's a little upset that we're equating smooth jazz to Kenneth G. He would point out that the way this began, and he is a very wonderful 84 years old right now, is Bob James. Michael Barr, tell us about Bob James. In the 80s, all of a sudden, there's this guy playing strange chords.
He was one of the greatest. And in the album between the combination of Bob James and David Sanborn, and it came out with Maputo. Michael, I'm here.
And even what we did with Jay Beckenstein earlier, Inspire a Gyro folks, when you hear a saxophone in a song, that was invented by the late, beloved David Sanborn. Michael Barr there on Smooth Jazz.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And I'm John Tucker in the Bloomberg Newsroom. This Bloomberg Business Flash and the major stock averages, they are mixed right now, indicating a mixed open on Wall Street. The futures, Dow futures right now, 21 points lower. The S&P E-mini futures up 10 points. NASDAQ futures right now, 58 points higher. Since we are data dependent, we got at the top of the hour home prices in the U.S. rising in May. Buyers fighting over a pretty slim supply of properties for sale. The national measure of prices increasing 5.9% from a year earlier. This according to data from S&P CoreLogic Case Shiller. Microsoft this morning says it's investigating outages of some of its Office applications and service, the issue impacting multiple Microsoft 365 services and features. This according to the company in a post on X this morning. Microsoft 365, this includes the common productivity applications like Outlook, Word, and Excel. And Procter & Gamble, those shares down over 5%, reporting quarterly sales missing analyst projections. And as we wait for a Fed decision, that'll come on Wednesday from the FOMC. Looking at yields right now, the 2-year down a basis point, that's at 4.38. The 10-year yield, 2 basis points lower, that is at 4.15. And we check the markets for you all day long, right here on Bloomberg Radio. I'm John Tucker. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom.
Thanks so much, John. Greatly appreciate it. Red and green on the screen, a little NASDAQ lift. It's going to be fascinating to see the uncertainty as we trade up to Microsoft, and I guess we get certainty after that. I thought Mike Green was just brilliant, John Tucker, on the separateness of these cash generators from everybody else, mere mortals.
Great discussion.
Having a debate about where we are. Joining us now for a brief into the madness, I say madness, of the next 3 days is Michael McKee. And one of the great things about Mike McKee, and we're very different in our economics, is every once in a while, it's sort of like a pregnancy. It's like on a 9-month basis. McKee says to me,
let's just stop you right there.
McKee says to me, hey, stupid. And one time I was underplaying the JOLT survey, and I got the hey, stupid from Michael McKee. We get a JOLT survey here. What's it mean today?
It could put itself into irrelevance. The Fed has been looking at that as a sign that the labor market has been loose. There are issues with it that are well known. The response rate is very low, but when we were seeing huge numbers of job openings, the Fed was saying, well, we don't need to worry about the unemployment rate because it's not going to be people who are losing jobs. It's going to be companies just have excess openings. Now we're back to where we were pre-pandemic. So it's telling you the labor market has rebalanced.
Right.
And if we don't have a surprise today, it probably starts to fade as a major indicator for the Fed and therefore
right.
for
I don't want to
for
get into
us.
Somrel's silliness. It's out there right now. It's just ridiculous. But do you have in your head like a 4-week moving average of claims where a PhD at the Eccles building sits up and goes, oh,
I think you'd have to get close to 300,000. I haven't
really
done
that far up?
any
That far
work
up?
on it, but the numbers that we have are not associated with recessions. And this is a period of time. July is always a month where you have uneven numbers because you get plants closing down for retooling and things like that. We also had the numbers affected by the hurricane that hit the Houston area. So we're not getting a clean read on
and
on
you
job
get mobility as well. I mean, Jazz Chisholm moved from Miami up to New York, borrowed Judge's bat, and hit a home run.
Right.
I mean, this is, there's some upset here.
Well, there are job switchers, and of course,
There's
we
job
always
switchers.
watch to see whether they get more money for switching jobs.
He's going to get more money if he continues to hit 2 home runs at a game. John Tucker.
Is there a point at which inflation is going to go this way and unemployment's got to go that way? They cross over?
For those on radio, I could see what
one
John
down,
was
one
doing.
up.
Yeah, one down, one up. That's the whole thing that Tom doesn't want to get into, the Somm rule. Basically, to oversimplify, former Fed economist Claudia Somm noted that if you have a significant rise in unemployment, 0.5% over a short period of time, then it tends to continue going up and goes up at a faster pace. And so, yes, that's a possibility. But this time, the reason we're seeing unemployment rise is a little different. It's not because companies are laying off people, to go back to the unemployment, the initial claims, but it's because more people have been entering the labor force. And there's a lot of questions about why that is. But if that's the case, then it's not a problem.
I have a recollection, ancient history. Mike McKee and I in a meeting of 20, 30 people with Chairman Bernanke. In our Washington office, Craig Torres is there, Rich Miller, all the giants of Bloomberg Economics. And I got going with Bernanke with great respect to his work. And he said, look, Tom, it's a hockey stick. We have a hockey stick right now. It's a Victoria 5-stripe, and it's like, Life 5. And we have a hockey stick in manufacturing investment. And I got emails from David Rosenberg telling me manufacturing employment is slowing down. Have you studied that?
Yeah, I've looked into it like a lot of economists have, and you've got a situation where companies are adopting technology to improve output, but that means with technology being what it is, you have fewer people employed. It's a little more complicated than just saying machines are replacing people, because what you end up with is, instead of a widget guy just moving widgets around on an assembly line, you get somebody who has to operate the computer, and they may be classified differently other than manufacturing workers. So there's a lot that goes into that, but basically it's what you would sort of expect would happen and has been happening, of manufacturing jobs going away as automation takes over.
This is one of my most famous charts, Mike McKee. It's manufacturing to population, and I take it on a percentage change basis. And there was the glory days of 1940, World War II. Down we go. There's a massive crash starting at 2000. And then the Obama years, not to give Obama the credit, but in the Obama years, there's actually a leveling and recovery before the pandemic. Can you suggest that we could see manufacturing to population break out and recover somewhat in the next 5-10 years?
Well, we could, because there is an effort now to reshore, to bring back manufacturing into this country. And there's a sort of underappreciated aspect to manufacturing that we are seeing a real shortage of munitions producers in the United States that is starting to worry people in the defense establishment.
I mean, like ammunition.
Ammunition.
Bullets, rockets, and the rest.
Because we are selling so much, sending so much to Ukraine and Israel, it's become obvious that if there was a big war, we wouldn't have enough stuff.
And you can't offshore that?
There's going to be, you can't offshore that. So there's going to be a big push probably in the next administration, whoever it is, to increase defense spending on that kind of manufacturing. So there's another aspect to it. And it's not just bombs and bullets, but it's tanks and jeeps and all that stuff.
Can you stay till 9:30 and go further with us? Every time he walks in, I learn something. He goes, "Hey, stupid, pay attention to the JOLT survey."
Well, now he's saying don't pay attention to it, right?
Well,
kind of not.
We'll pay attention today, and then we'll decide if we need to pay attention.
There we go.
In the future.
That's a Michael McKee we love. Michael McKee in charge of all of our international economics here. And, of course, he goes into a busy 3 days. Cocoa lost. It's terrible to be part of our Summer Games updates. Our Summer Games updates from Paris. They're brought to you by State Street Global Advisors. And we thank State Street Global Advisors for briefing us even when Coco exits early.
That was your update. Coco loses.
Well, that's, what I mean, you got the guy with the pommel thingy with the glasses on. Everybody's talking about him.
Pommel guy.
They're doing that. And there's been some upsets. I don't know about swimming in the River Seine. I called Caroline Cohen up. I said, "What do you think?" She goes, "No way. Triathlon's delayed because they're waiting to get the water straightened out."
I am shocked.
Katie Greifeld would point out that dressage starts tomorrow night.
It does.
That's a horse thing.
That's a horse thing.
And that's out at Versailles, which should be beautiful.
Out left, yeah.
Yeah, somebody said you got to go to the Eiffel Tower, beach volleyball, and Versailles for the horses. And those are the most beautiful.
Look to our Summer Games updates. They're brought to you by State Street Global Advisors. Green on the screen, a little bit of a lift. We need to get the markets open. Good morning.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And I'm John Tucker in the Bloomberg Newsroom with this opening bell report from the New York Stock Exchange. Stocks pre-FOMC drift. S&P futures up this morning, continuing the recovery from the sell-off last week. The 10-year yield's little change, but trading near multi-month lows. And there you have it, the opening bell at the NYSE. Out of the gate, S&P 500 is 14 points higher. That's a rise of 0.3%, 54.79 in the index. Dow Jones Industrial Average right now 100 points higher. That's up 0.25%. We're at 40,637. The NASDAQ 100 68 points higher. That is up 0.4%. Ahead of the earnings report after the close of regular trading today, shares of Microsoft right now pretty much unchanged. And after their results this morning, shares of New Jersey-based Merck down right now 3%, and Procter & Gamble, the consumer products giant, after their disappointing results, those shares 5% lower. And we check the markets for you all day long right here on Bloomberg Radio. I'm John Tucker, and that is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom?
Like everybody else, there's just no other way to put it. I have two flights. I have a business class flight, what's called 5756, out of Newark to Paris. And I've got another flight, which is economy, New York to LAX. And I just monitor them. There's nothing scientific about it. Joining us now, the scientist of airline travel, TD Cowen analyst Helene Becker's with us this morning. Helene, I'm looking at Paris in September, down 41% from the agony I paid months and months and months ago in the middle of the pandemic. Economy, New York LAX, Delta's giving away at $267 round trip. Robert Crandall would tell me it's time to take out capacity. Is it time, Helene Becker, for there to be fewer airplanes in the sky?
Well, certainly fewer seats in the sky. But yes, that's what we were thinking back in December. Tom, you and I talked about this. We had published a report in which we said that there were going to be too many seats from not so much the U.S. airlines, but from the non-U.S. airlines in the North Atlantic this summer, and that pricing would come down. Number one. And number two, to your point about Paris, people don't go to Paris during the Olympics. I know that sounds counterintuitive. And of course, we see people there all the time. But pragmatically, corporate travel doesn't go to Paris during the Olympics. And or any time there are Olympics, corporate travel won't go because everybody, air quotes around, everybody's on vacation or away. So there's no business to be done. And so that's what that adds to the lack of demand. And then I think the other thing we're seeing is people who live in these communities are pushing back against over-tourism. It kind of existed pre-pandemic. And then during the pandemic, people really saw how important tourism was to their economies. And now, since it's come roaring back again, you see people pushing back.
Now, are you seeing, John Tucker, over tourism in New Jersey? Are they,
At
is it the New Jersey Shore?
It's the worst place you could possibly go, so please, all of you, stay away,
Good.
Especially on the weekends outside my house.
Do you have a question for Helene Becker here about Newark or whatever? The parking lot known as Newark Airport.
No, what I do want to ask you, are the discount airlines, are they kind of toast? I mean, we saw evidence of that with JetBlue's results this morning, and of course, we all know the story about Southwest trying to become a big boy airline, I would put it.
Yeah, I don't think they're toast, but it's really difficult to be competitive as an ultra low cost carrier when your costs have gone up 50% or more. And if you think about what's happened over the last 3 or 4 years, we've seen this huge increase in salaries, wages, and benefits for the industry in general, but it's been a bigger increase for the ultra low cost carriers to retain people, not so much to hire. It's always easy to hire, but when American, Delta, and United were rebuilding their workforce, they were hiring more aggressively, and to retain everybody else had to raise their pay rates. So that put pressure on margins, especially in an environment where there are too many seats in the places where Americans like to go.
Well, your Thomas Fitzgerald has JetBlue, and I know you're looking at a bigger overview, Helene Becker. I don't want you to do buy, hold, sell on JetBlue, but they're out with a whole series of headlines. And to me, the great summary is they have to figure out how to cut capacity. Am I right on that?
Yes, and I think they also announced, Tom, in the pressers today that they are going to defer delivery of 55-ish aircraft.
Yeah.
So they're thinking about that, right? They're addressing the issue.
Right.
The reason that they wanted to buy Spirit has kind of gone away. And they need to figure out how they can get back to sustainable profitability. And if you think back over the 20-ish years of JetBlue's life, they started the way a lot of other low-cost carriers start, and that's in South Florida, right? Because all Americans go to three places. They go to South Florida, they go to Las Vegas, and maybe Southern California. And I know that's kind of a sarcastic way to think about it, but pragmatically, that's how JetBlue started, and that was very successful for them. And then they grew into the Caribbean, especially out of San Juan, where American had a hub and then dismantled it, which was beneficial to them because a lot of New Yorkers and Bostonians go to the Caribbean in the winter.
No.
And they just need to get back to their roots.
Helene, I got to get this in. Tucker's got like 8 questions. I got to get this in. Let's sum this up. Cowen has Fitzgerald. They've got Kai von Rumer, and they got Helene Becker. You guys own the high ground on airline analysis. Here's the summary. United Airlines is flat over 10 years. Can you sell me with Kai? Can you sell me an upward vector in airlines over the next 3, 5, or 10 years?
Well, I think growth is going to continue. People are going to continue to want to travel. Managed corporate is coming back slowly. Other business travel is coming back. So yes, I think that as you think about the travel industry in general over the next 5 years, the demand isn't going away. And I think that's really important. People still want to travel. And even with the nearshoring that you were talking about with your prior guest just a few minutes ago, you still have to travel. And there's going to be a lot of, in order to bring that back, there's obviously going to be a lot of construction, a lot of building, a lot of hiring, and that's going to necessitate a lot of travel. So yeah, I mean, I think in general, the industry over the next decade will be a lot different than the industry over the prior decade.
Yeah.
But Tom, what you're seeing in the industry is probably what we should have seen in 2020 when the government rescued the airline industry by loaning them money.
Oh, come on. Stop. They rescued the airline industry so they could kill me on a plane flight I had to do with a family, John. The rescue by the government directly went over to the exorbitant tickets I paid in 2021. I mean, that's all there is to it. And now the tickets have come down 41%. John, jump in here.
All right,
please.
so what's next for me and Tom, the members of the flying public? I know it's going to be crowded, but what else?
Well, I think you're going to see, prices have already come down, which is good, which means, pressure on margins. And I don't think that's going to go away in the short term either. I think you're going to see more industry consolidation because it should have happened 4 years ago.
Who's
it's
next?
Happening now. In terms of
consolidating.
So you have Alaska and Hawaiian that are with the merger that's still pending. You have the ultra low cost carriers that haven't returned to profitability yet, that have to rethink their business plans in order to get there. And if they don't, they're going to have to, consider reorganizing in Chapter 11.
Do we have enough pilots?
We do. So in 2014, we wrote the initial report on not enough pilots. And in 2020, the industry asked all pilots who were thinking of retiring over the next 2 to 4 years to retire, which they did. And then they've gone out over the last 3 years and hired. But you see, like FedEx, for an example, because they're not doing the Postal Service contract anymore during the day, 500 pilots are being furloughed. Some of them probably will get jobs at UPS because they are hiring for pilots to handle the Postal Service contract. But you've seen Southwest put hiring plans on hold. You saw earlier this year, United, which has resumed hiring, put plans on hold, though. Spirit has put plans on hold. So you see that the number of pilots that are being hired has declined quite dramatically. And so I think, yes, the answer in a word is yes, we do.
Helene, thanks for the update. Greatly appreciate it.
Tom.
Lower fares, no question. I just wonder when capacity drifts away, as it always seems to. I don't get the business. John, over 10 years, I just don't get the madness of how you make profit in air travel. I just simply don't get it.
And is business travel coming back? She says it is. I have my doubts.
Oh, well, that's the way Michael Barr rolls. With our news, a Dow up 150 points. With our news in New York City, Michael, business class Barr.
Thank you very much, Tom and John. Where's my drink? Kamala Harris is heading back out on the campaign trail today with a rally in Atlanta. Ahead of that, she's put out her first presidential campaign ad.
The one thing Kamala Harris has always been: fearless. As a prosecutor.
While Donald Trump is looking to define Harris with an ad of his own.
This is America's border czar, and she's failed us. Under Harris, over 10 million illegally.
The New York Times reports the Trump campaign is spending more than $12 million to run that ad in 6 battleground states over the next 2 weeks. Harris's team says her commercial is part of a $50 million spending blitz before next month's Democratic convention. A horrible knife attack in Britain. Police say the stabbings at a children's dance class in northwest England yesterday killed 3 children and injured 8 other people. The event was a Taylor Swift-themed dance and yoga event for children aged to about 6 and 11 years old. It took place at a community center in Southport near Liverpool. Chief Constable Serena Kennedy.
When they arrived, they were shocked to find that multiple people, many of whom were children, had been subjected to a ferocious attack.
The kids who died were the ages of 6, 7, and 9. Chief Kennedy says officials have arrested a 17-year-old boy in that incident, and there's no known motive for now. Terrorism has been ruled out. Violent protests have erupted in Venezuela over allegations that the presidential election was stolen by the country's president, Nicolas Maduro. The opposition candidate was strongly favored in the polls. Mundo Gonzalez says he has proof that he has won the election. At the Paris Games, organizers postponed the men's triathlon to tomorrow, citing insufficient water quality levels in the Seine River. In tennis, Coco Gauff lost in the 3rd round of the singles. In the overall medal count, the U.S. leads at 20, France at 16, Japan has 12. Global news, 24 hours a day, and whenever you want it. With Bloomberg News Now, I'm Michael Barr. This is Bloomberg. Tom and John.
Michael Barr, thanks so much. And with that, Olympic updates, Summer Games updates, always on Bloomberg Radio. Brought to you by State Street Global Advisors, and that'll be out here in the coming days. Are we doing this tomorrow? We got another Gur's going to show up here in a moment to save the show. But, have you enjoyed this now?
Oh, so enjoyable.
I got to just
9 hours straight on the air.
Barr,
love it.
Barr is out tomorrow. So the opening tomorrow, folks, is good morning, everyone. Tom Keene, John Tucker in for Paul Sweeney, John Tucker in for Michael Barr.
Wait,
for
are you out tomorrow?
No, man. He just wants to see that look on your face, man. It worked. I like it.
Painful.
We're getting YouTube's lit up like a candle. You're getting hearts like Lisa Mateo gets,
Oh, really?
Yeah.
That would be a first.
Loving it.
Now, next week, I can't say anything about that.
We'll have to see. We are here with the market lifting. The market open doing better than futures. That's the key memo right now. Futures, SP up 22 points, Dow up 159 points.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And I'm John Tucker at the Bloomberg Newsroom with this Bloomberg Business Flash. In the early going, the major indexes in the green right now. Stocks rising as investors wade through any number of corporate results, and also, of course, bracing for the FOMC meeting. We get a decision tomorrow. The Fed probably going to signal that they're about to cut at the September meeting. And this will be critical in shaping the trajectory of global markets. And as we look at Procter & Gamble shares, they're on the move this morning, down 6.4%, reporting quarterly sales, missing analyst projections there. And before their results after the close of regular trading today, shares of Microsoft, they are a little changed, $426.75 a share. S&P 500, 18 points higher. That's up 0.3%, 5481 on the index. The Dow Jones Industrial Average of 165 points. That's a rise of 0.4% at 40,699. The Nasdaq 100, the tech-heavy Nasdaq 100, 50 points higher. That is up 0.25%. And two-year yields down 2 basis points. That's at 4.37. The 10-year yield right now 1 basis point lower. That's at 4.15. We check the markets for you all day long, right here on Bloomberg Radio. I'm John Tucker, and that's your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom.
John Tucker, thanks so much. On a Tuesday, again, big Wednesday, Thursday, Friday here with economic data and, of course, a tech frenzy. Look for that this afternoon. Tim and Carol have that for you. They'll break down all the earnings on Microsoft. So, John, if you're at Cornell, I mean, some people, like, they tell their parents they're taking a major. And then some people go like a major minor. David Gura at Cornell, a long time ago, he did a minor. He did, it was interesting. One of those minors was Latin American Studies. So joining us now, our resident in the last 24 hours.
So this makes him the
expert. I knew this would aid me in some capacity in my later career.
On Venezuela's David Gura. I mentioned this early in the 7 o'clock hour, David, when you were not up. It was Operation Urgent Fury, which was the invasion of Grenada. And I just remember it just was a mess. And that defines our Caribbean and Latin American relationships, going back to James Monroe, 5th president of the United States. Do we have a Latin American or Venezuela policy?
We do, but this, what's been happening in Venezuela has been a thorn in the side of many governments for a very long time. And so what's happening there, the instability that we're seeing here is just an evolution of all of that. And so I've been watching all of this unfold, and it is a moment that seems pretty precarious. You have this election, you have the opposition candidates saying now that party feels like they have a real sense that there was some malfeasance here in terms of what ballots were counted and what weren't. And the White House is taking this seriously. The president's going to get on the phone with the president of Brazil today to talk about what happens next. But Venezuela has been, to put it candidly, just a mess now for a very long time.
Is there any redemption? I know it's not a big take yet, but I know you'll do the proper treatment. When you talk to the likes of Shannon O'Neill or Ricardo Hausman or others that have lived this, is there any sense of optimism?
There's a muted sense of optimism. I mean, this is a country that has so much in resources and has squandered so much over these last years that, I think a lot of that optimism has faded. But, you mentioned what I studied in college. I also lived in Bolivia, which is another country that's kind of been through this for years and years and years. And
so did you get off the train just like Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid?
Rode off.
You just knew that was coming.
I insisted on that. I said, let me get off the American Airlines plane and get right on the horse's back and ride straight to La Paz.
Did you live in the same town that Catherine Ross lived in?
Right, yeah.
Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid?
I lived in La Paz for about half a year, and I was there when Evo Morales came to power, so he had a socialist bent and kind of tried to throw into stark relief the kind of intervention that the United States had in Latin America and Bolivia for some time. So I've lived through the kind of protests that we'd seen in Bolivia, we've seen in these last few days, that we've seen in Venezuela, rather. And the whole region has been beset by this. And to go back to what you said at the top, Tom, yes, the United States has had Latin American policy, a lot of it has been wrong-headed, and we've kind of see that come to pass in recent years.
And let me guess, none of this
John.
is going to be on the Big Take podcast.
Not today, but it is something that we're watching. And of course, the threat here, and this was before the elections, a lot of Venezuelans said that they would leave if we were to see the kind of outcome it appears that we have seen. So I think that there are a couple of economic stories to be done. That's certainly one of them. If we get mass exodus or mass migration out of the country, another is just sort of how the U.S. responds, and do new sanctions come into play here that will affect that economy even more.
Okay, what else are you focused on, David?
Well, continue to focus on the presidential election. So the episode that we had out late last night, early this morning, focuses on Donald Trump's fundraising, and he went down to Nashville, Music City, over the weekend and had a big dinner where he a round table where he raised $800,000 a ticket for folks in the crypto community to sit down with him. So we're looking at the degree to which his perspective on digital assets and crypto has shifted. He was an avowed skeptic when he was in the White House. I think he realized when he was able to sell NFTs of his own visage, made a few $1 million doing that, there is money to be made here. So he has now given the crypto community a warm embrace.
He had trading cards.
He had digital trading cards, 2 sets of them. And as a result of that, and we talked with Zeke Fox, who's written a great book about crypto, he's invited those people to come in. They've changed his mind on crypto, and they got him to the Bitcoin conference in Nashville.
Make money off it?
Indeed, he can, and he has.
But David, seriously, where's the crypto vote? I mean, within Pew Research's 9 topologies of America, I don't see the crypto vote there. Where is it?
You are hitting the nail on the head. He believes that there is a crypto voting bloc, and there are some who say that this is their single issue. I think that is a very, very small section of the electorate. So he maintains that. We haven't seen Kamala Harris we haven't reported that she's made overtures to the crypto community. It's a small subset here that it itself is claiming has more importance than I think Pew and others would say it does.
Can I wrap my hands around any polling yet, or do I have to wait?
It's coming. We've had some preliminary polls that show that the race has tightened. Favorability for Kamala Harris has improved dramatically by 11 points in a poll that we got from ABC News and Ipsos. But all the pollsters that I've read commentary from say it still merits more time. This is still shaking out. There's a lot of talk of a honeymoon period for the vice president, now candidate. So I think in the coming days, we're going to get a better data on this from all sorts of outfits.
Was Bolivia safe?
It was incredibly safe. I really stood out there. I'm about 6'1" and blonde, so I stood out in the country. But I never felt like it was dodging. Of course, when Evo Morales was coming to power, there were protests all over the country. I went to check them out. Again, I stood out, but never felt like I was in danger. And there's just a protest culture there that I witnessed, wasn't a part of, but saw. No, I never felt targeted. But again, there's a legacy there of American intervention that kind of made me seem like I was an outsider.
Let me get this one question in, and this goes to Robert Kaplan and Henry Kissinger in Realist Politics. Are we too strident in demanding democracy in some of these unique countries?
There has been a bluntness to our approach. So I think you could say it's strident. I'd say that it's been a blunt approach. And, in the case of Bolivia, this is a majority indigenous country, which makes it stand out in Latin America. There was very little appreciation of that for a very long time, both domestically and internationally. And I think when I was there, that was what was coming to the fore, a recognition that this is a huge population that has been largely marginalized for a very long time. And they finally had somebody who was not only nodding to that, but coming from that group. Safe to say, Tom, that was something that wasn't acknowledged by the U.S. for decades and decades when it came to their policy toward the Andes broadly.
The big take. David Gurrow.
This one in an unexpected direction, John Tucker. Lovely to see you here.
Well, no, that's what we do.
It was an unexpected direction for me, too, when I came in this morning.
I didn't think we'd be talking about Catherine Ross in Bolivia.
Yeah.
Does anybody get your cinematic references who's under the age of 50?
The last time I had a conversation with Bob Redford, it was in Paris.
All right.
And I asked him if he heard
Bob. Hi, Bob.
I asked him if he heard the chicken, the rooster, when he kicked it at the train stop in Bolivia. He said, no, they didn't. It was a trained rooster or whatever.
It was a stunned rooster. That was your question. Okay.
It's a Tuesday morning with
Bob
David
motioning for
Gurrow.
security to come closer as Tom asked about the rooster.
Look for David Gurrow at the Big Take later this morning.
Surveillance
John Tucker,
Movie Club.
John
on
Tucker,
Tuesday.
Thank you so much for sitting in.
I'm not going anywhere.
We're doing our music today for Jazz Chisholm of the dreaded New York Yankees. He invented it, George Benson.
Give me the night. So come on out tonight, and we'll leave the others on a ride to paradise. And if you feel alright, then we can be lovers, 'cause I see that starlight look in your eyes. And don't you know we can fly? Just give me the night.